Week after week after week in 2024, and especially in the start of 2025, we are seeing sexual abuse cases happen in the LDS Church. It's almost regular. We sort of expect it at this point. And we, those of us out there making some noise, have been calling for the LDS Church to do better at protecting kids and those in vulnerable populations. Well, somebody did something about it. 21st Century Saints will join us tonight on tonight's episode of Mormonism Live. Radio Free Mormon, how are you tonight?
Thank you very much. I'm great. I was enjoying the applause, and then it just went.
It faded off into the sunset, and it is gone. It's another episode of Mormonism Live, as you always like to do. It is February 12th, 2025. Anything on your plate? What's happening in your world before we jump into tonight's episode?
Oh, my goodness. In my world, okay, I tell you what, I'm working on a really, really important episode, and I can't tell if it's going to be Radio Free Mormon or Mormonism Live, and I can't tell because I don't know yet, but I'm going to take the Book of Mormon challenge, and I think I'm going to win. That's all I can say about it right now. I'm going to take the Book of Mormon challenge, and I think RFM can win.
Nice. Most competitions that Radio Free Mormon enters, he does win. So we'll see how this one goes. I'm excited to hear more about this RFM. This is the first I've heard. Let's jump into tonight's episode. I'm going to bring some guests on, Jane Christie and Sarah Delaney. How are the both of you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. So we wanted to have you on to have a conversation. You had approached me maybe a month ago or so to have a conversation around safeguarding. And so I want to sort of set this up, maybe give you both a moment to sort of introduce yourselves and let folks know who you are. Most people in our audience are going to be aware of who you guys are and the work that you guys produce. But let's start there.
Okay, I'll jump in first. First of all, the Brett Vengers, we all have the same issues at times. There can be a little bit of lag. So if Sarah and I are speaking over each other or it takes a little moment, just apologize in advance. So I'm Jane Christie. Started a podcast a while back called 21st Century Saints. And at the time, I'm an active member of the church, and we wanted to focus on the lived experience of safeguarding, just to sort of the lived experience of Mormonism generally, and then we got into safeguarding pretty quickly, and we'll talk about how that came about. It is worth pointing out I'm no longer a member of the church. I handed in what we would call in the UK, I handed in my P45. I don't know what you would call that, and I resigned. I quit. What do you? In the vernacular. So I did that last Easter. So I'm about a year out of the church, and that's my background. Sarah?
Yeah, my background is I come at the safeguarding concerns with a professional background of having worked within the sexual abuse field within about 30 years of a professional life. Retired a few years ago, been a member of the church for nearly 50 years. Very, very nuanced member of the church. I've got a state calling as a safeguarding specialist, which is a new calling that we only have in the UK. But I also do the podcast, and I've done a lot of work around trying to bring to the attention of church authorities that they simply need to do better to protect and safeguard children. So I kind of straddle the divide of state calling, 21st Century Saints. Let's sort safeguarding out using some professional expertise and knowledge.
I've always thought that it really wouldn't be that hard to get 2, 3, 4 common sense people into a room and figure out what it is that the church needs to do better. And yet for some reason, these 15 men seem to like things the way they are and don't seem eager to make changes. It seems like it takes a lot of pressure to get those. In Sam Young's case, it gets him excommunicated. take us back in time. I think this conversation sort of starts back in 2021, 2022. Well, one of you guys sort of take the lead here. I'm going to put the slideshow up on the screen, and you can tell me when to turn to what. But I wanted to give you guys a chance to sort of set the stage and how did this all come about and how did we get into this? And then we'll get into the actual material and where this request, which is the healthiest thing in the world, is, hey, LDS Church, you have some blind spots. I know you have prophets, seers, and revelators, but regardless, you have blind spots. And there are ways that you leave people open to being abused. And you could pretty easily close all of those loopholes and make the church a whole lot safer place. And so tell us where that started.
So my best friend was really struggling with just being in church. It was getting tougher and tougher. Most of her family had left, and in the UK, when you've got a couple of sort of key families in a ward, and the church is really crashing here, and no one's allowed to talk about it. So what we would see is these conversations that were happening in the foyer, where things were getting so honest, often led by women, and these conversations would be about things like safeguarding and some of the things that get discussed in the bloggernacle and online. Those conversations do happen at church, except we're not supposed to be having them. So I started a podcast because I thought it might help my friend stay in the church, because this would be a great place to know that we're not alone. And what we really quickly find out is that people want to have those conversations, that people have been trying to talk about safeguarding professionally, that getting 3 or 4 people in a room and having a really sensible conversation, safeguarding, child safety, adult safety. It just makes sense. Of course, we have to do something. You're having these conversations all the time at work, but we can't have them in church. And it's understandable, because those conversations are so scary. The reason why we have those conversations in the foyer and not class is because they're scary. If we're talking about abuse and child protection and vulnerabilities in adults, of course that's going to be scary. How do we navigate that? So we needed some experts, and one of the first people we invited to come on the podcast was Bill Reel, who gave us some incredible advice. And I feel like the UK really needed the voice of some of these podcasters who'd been around for a while. Not that I'm calling you old, but you have been here for a while, Bill, and so your experience was very much appreciated. Sarah, at this point then, after we started in roughly 2021, we within weeks are getting contacted regularly by people in the United Kingdom who've experienced abuse in the church. And then you and I meet at a Sunstone conference. Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, Jane and I met at Sunstone 2020, I think it was, and we had some conversations about problems that we were encountering in the church. And one of the things that we spoke about was safeguarding and abuse. And we were both able to talk about people that we knew that had experienced abuse, where the response had been extraordinarily poor. And we were able to talk about how we tried to raise this with church leaders. We tried to talk to bishops, stake presidents, and say, look, there's a problem in the church. We can do much better about abuse. Can we talk about this? And every time I tried to have that conversation with any church leadership, it was just shut down immediately. It was like, the priesthood have got this. It's all right. It's all under control. The priesthood have got it. And I was saying, Bishop, stake president, it's not under control and you don't have this. You really don't. But the conversations just got shut down and it was impossible to get anyone to listen. So Jane and I had a really good discussion about how can we do this? How can we bring a focus to abuse in the church and try to motivate the church to bring in just a few of the basic safeguarding practices that are recommended by the UK government, which is around background checks, training, information, and just general good practice guidance. And we wanted to try and get the church to accept and bring those in, in, we were getting nowhere. So we started a podcast, and we thought the more attention we can get to focus on this problem, maybe we can bring about change and make the church a safer, more wholesome place for everyone to be. That's where it came from. Being shut down, not listened to, and where there's nowhere else to go, but a very public podcast.
Sarah and Jane, this is much more than just a theoretical exercise. There must be some real world things that are happening that are prompting you to do this, right?
Yeah.
The main thing for the podcast itself, for us as individuals who are behind the podcast, there is one victim, a survivor, who has never been able to share their story. She is incredible, and her story is so complex. We saw discussions about this playing out on social media about the specifics of some aspects of the case, and the intimidation which we received as people who host a podcast. We hadn't even really done much about safeguarding, other than, okay, let's talk about some of the themes that this would bring up. And we saw so much polarization, people taking sides. Protect LDS Children had said they had never seen a response like this before to a case. And so, yeah, and that person's name, that's, you know what, I was intimidated. I was like, we can't be doing this. This is
What was happening, Jane? What was being done?
Individuals threatening us with being sued, that they were going to take legal action against us, that we weren't allowed to talk about subjects that were already in the public domain.
Who was threatening you?
And so, yeah, people. Yeah, I don't want to
associated with the LDS Church or with this particular defendant.
Could just say family members that were accused of abuse, but so it's family members that have been accused of abuse and didn't want attention drawn to that.
The UK is so tiny, and if you've ever served a mission in the UK, you know pretty much everyone. So growing up here, everyone knows everyone. Any identifying information that we could provide would be just so easy for people to be able to identify. So we're keeping this super vague, but we wanted to just be specific that, yeah, we were being intimidated. In addition to this, the actual victims were being intimidated, and yes, the church itself was part of that. Leadership within the church were part of that. Their story has not been told. It will be at some point, and we continue to support them. So in their name, we decided to do more. So that, yes, this is personal, because everybody that we've been in touch with and the people who are having these conversations with us, they have names. We know them. We've been working with them. They have been through a lot. So yeah, this is very personal.
Yeah. Can I ask?
And we'd see.
No, go ahead. Share your thoughts.
I'd come across experiences at church where they had sex offenders attending a congregation, and I would say to Bishop, I know this person, I know the problems, I know the risks. Please let me help you come up with a risk management plan that is going to be safe, because this is not safe at the moment. And it was the same message, which was basically, can you just go away because we know what we're doing? And I'm like, hang on a minute, you really don't know what you're doing, and you really need to understand this. I had one case from when I was actually working, when one of the roles that I had was working with what in the UK is called a multi-agency public protection panel, which manages the highest risk offenders in the country. So the ones that pose the greatest risk of harm to the public. And one of my roles was kind of risk assessments and being part of that panel. And we had an offender that we were managing that started being taught by missionaries in the church. Now, this came to my attention because somebody came to me and said, hey, you're a member of the Mormon church, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, did you know this guy started attending church? And I was like, that's seriously worrying. I try to have conversations as a professional in my professional role by phoning the mission president and state president and saying, we need to talk about this. And the response was, from the mission president, particularly, the response was, well, the Spirit will guide us. We'll be very prayerful about how we manage this. And then I said, well, what has he told you? Because we had a conversation with the offender and said, you have to talk to the church about this, and we need to check that you've spoken to them about your offences. And he told them a very minimised version of the truth, as you would expect. And when I challenged the mission president and said, well, what he's told you is not true, he said, well, I have to believe what he's told me. And I said, and yet as professionals, I said, we are telling you that he is not sharing the truth and he is a danger to members of your congregation. And I thought, we've got a serious problem if I'm talking to you as a professional about somebody that we're managing and you're telling me that you've got it in hand and you don't really need any help and you can handle this. And I mean, the ridiculousness of that situation was the person eventually got baptized, committed a sexual offence, got baptized the next day, appeared in court the day after that, and then disappeared from church completely. And still, with all that, I called the mission president. I said, you told me that you would contact me if there are any changes. I said, and I hear this guy's been baptized. And he said, oh, yes. I said, well, did you know the day before he committed a sexual offence? I said, and his reason for baptism was so he could go into court and tell them that this has now been a change in his life. And that conversation didn't go well. But it just heightened for me the concerns that the church were not on top of safeguarding. And we had a person in our congregation that had got convictions for looking at illegal images of children. Child pornography, as people usually call it, but they're illegal images of children, and we need to remember that. And he was just attending church and nobody seemed to know what to do with him, and attempts to say, well, this is what we need as a risk management plan. Priesthood were really loath to talk to me, and I think part of it is because I was a woman. I think that was part of it, because all these things should be dealt with by priesthood. And it just left me very concerned that we'd got victims talking to us, we'd got offenders that we knew weren't being safely managed, and we just felt that we couldn't sit by any longer and sit in kind of ungodly silence doing absolutely nothing about high-risk situations where we felt that we had the motivation, the energy and the skills to try and do something. So we just thought we can't sit by in silence and do nothing any longer. We started it totally expecting to be excommunicated. Instead, I got a state calling and Jane resigned her membership. So we still don't know where we're going to be in the next few months.
So what I think it's really important to jump in with it at this moment is, obviously we're going to be talking about tough stuff here. We want to just really emphasize that for the audience. The chat family is so incredible. We love hanging out with you guys, but also, self-care. If this is not the right episode for you to be listening to at this moment in time, come back to it later. We love it when you stick around, but it's really important that you look after yourself. Take breaks where you have to. It's also really significant, and I know we're going to move on to the next slides, but Sarah is, she gives expert testimony in court. She's an expert witness. She has a wealth of experience working with ex-offenders, young people. So she knows what she's talking about. She's headed social work departments. Sarah, while she is the best of the best, there are other people who have been saying the same thing, the same message throughout the church across the world. I have expertise in this area. Would you like me to help? And like Sarah has been asked to leave the room at times when it would come into conflict with her professional obligations. It's really important that we listen to Sarah. Now, Sarah and people like her, Sarah didn't sort of suggest, hey, let's talk about this in a podcast maybe. Do you think? Sarah said, hey, we have to be talking about this. You need to do this. So here's what we need to do. And now, how, when someone is that kind of assertive, have people not heard this message for the past, 30 years that she's been in the church? These are assertive people who know how to put themselves across professionally, who hold themselves to professional standards, know what expectation is. But the message that keeps coming back is that someone else has got it, where it's being looked at. And so information would go up the chain to die.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say something here. I want to take my time working through this idea. There's a certain landscape in Mormonism that is unique from other religions. And there are other religions that have some of these, and some religions that have all of them, but there's a lot of religions that don't. So when you have this when you put the top 15 guys in the realm of Moses, Noah, and Abraham, rather than just Pastor Jim, you create an environment where it's not your job to tell them what they're doing wrong. It's their job to tell you what you're doing wrong. And every priesthood leader in Mormonism, all the way from the bishop on up, knows that that's a fine line that you have to tread carefully. You recognize that as you speak up the hierarchy, you can't just be two people talking about a problem. You're the underling and you're talking to the superior officer. And
right,
that facet alone creates a barrier to healthy spaces where we protect people, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the idea of forgiveness. So if somebody is a potential to be a repeat offender as an abuser, they will get the opportunity to abuse again because of forgiveness. Those two things alone affect multiple facets of what's not safe in Mormonism. This problem would take so many things to address it. Anyway, your thoughts, because it sounds like you have a lot to say.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, so much to say. Yes, because Sarah, you go first.
I just was like, coupled with that as well. Coupled with that, you've also got the whole issue about the insular nature of this church and the lack of transparency. So the church doesn't want to be open and honest and clear around what's happening about abuse.
For abuse,
right?
Yes.
Absolutely. The only thing necessary for abuse to flourish is secrecy. Right. And if you have secrecy, abuse can flourish. And that's all it needs. And we have secrecy in the church because we are not clear enough in talking about abuse. So you've got not only got a few people in charge that everybody else actually does bow down to and obey, but you've also got a high level of control. You've got secrecy and you've got a lack of transparency. And those factors all combine to create the perfect ingredients for somebody that wishes to come along and see whether they can groom and abuse. And we don't provide enough training and information for people to understand how sex offenders operate.
Yeah.
We change sometimes depending on who the audience is. If we were having this conversation with people who are actively LDS, we use slightly different language. We have Mormon code words. We know what we're talking about. So the way we would explain that issue to people within the Mormon church, the way we've explained it to church lawyers, who feel that there is really good communication. Everything's working for them. The problem is the victim experience of this is that it gives the impression that that someone with authority can act with impunity because they are not able to take it further. And the other thing that it's doing that we've made really clear to lawyers is because everyone who is comfortable in this situation, if you haven't experienced this, if you haven't experienced the dissonance, then you genuinely think the church is safe. There's a handbook, it's got policies in it. Some of those policies are good. Truthfully, some of those policies are good, and we highlight those. You need to build on them. I mean, some of them are horrific, but okay, let's look at what you're doing that's good. But when you have a membership who really believe those policies are good and leaders who believe those policies are working, then what we've got is this illusion of safety where members really believe they're safe. Now, this is where I'm going to sound like an absolute bitch here, but this is where we have problems then when you get salacious movies like, the one about Operation Underground Railroads, all of that stuff. People who really want to believe that abuse is happening somewhere else with some other group of children. And yes, it does. You have to care. But this illusion of safety helps you to feel really comfortable that the people who are actually on your doorstep, that you have trust in, those people that you believe in, that your children are safe with, that's the worrying thing. And so if there's no ability to ask questions, then all we can do is what we're doing is without even realizing it, you are silencing victims. There are opportunities to act and you are missing them.
Yeah. In August of 2022, you guys launched this whole safeguarding, I want to say sort of program. You guys are creating materials, you're putting the word out there, you're encouraging church and church leaders to recognize. Maybe take us through that and what happens from there. So
what we wanted to do was it sounds so cheesy. So I also want to say, right, particularly when it comes to talking about the church response and lawyers, we laugh. Okay, this is really tough to be dealing with as often as we're dealing with it. It takes a toll. So we find these opportunities to, so if there's a little bit of humor that creeps in, I just want to reassure everyone that we in no way treat this subject lightly. But the subject that can unite the entirety of the Mormon spectrum, where everyone can agree, is safeguarding. Everyone wants to keep kids safe. So we had this opportunity where our audience bizarrely became active members. And then people who were sort of saying, oh, look, these people are members and they're talking about the problems of the church. So we had all of these ex-Mormons who were coming to, and, participate in the conversations. And then, of course, the nevermos. My husband has never been a member of the church and just thinks this is crazy. So everyone, we wanted to formally ask the church, because we can bitch about it all we want on the internet. We can have podcasts where we talk about it. Has anyone actually formally taken the next step? Let's put it in writing. Yeah. Let's make sure there's a paper trail. And so Sarah's going to talk about what she does, but I want to kick her off with she pitches up to church one Sunday. This is a woman who's retired. She pitches up to church one Sunday and does a TikTok where she's walking around the church building and she's pointing out, here is where the fire blanket is. Here's the accident book. Here's what happens if the church goes on fire. Here's what happens if you need to make an insurance claim. There is no information that's visible about keeping children and other people safe. There's no information about vulnerable groups, which in a British building and any organisation, we would expect those posters to be clearly visible. And so Sarah was asking this question, which I thought was brilliant. How would someone know who walked into this church building that you take safeguarding seriously? So Sarah, you took action. Where did you start?
We did. Well, we took action. I started off by, I contacted my bishop and sent him a message and said, this is what I intend to do with Jane Christie, 21st Century Saints. We are going to be challenging and requesting that the church take on board safeguarding practices. I explained to him, this is what's wrong with the church. This is what we're going to be asking the church to do. And this is why we're going to be doing it. And I'm letting you know, and our first podcast goes live tomorrow night. Then we started the podcast and launched it. We put the TikTok video online to just bring the point to everybody's attention that the church can actually talk a lot about rodent control. It can have fire control measures, but absolutely nothing for how you keep children safe. We know how we keep rodents away from the building because here's the rodent trap. We know how you manage a fire, but what are we doing about children? We put a letter together that we sent to our stake presidents and our bishops outlining examples of abuse, concerns that we had around people that had not been responded to appropriately following abuse, concerns where victims had been left at risk of serious harm and abusers had been left to possibly abuse again. And we pointed out that that was in breach of the UK guidance, in breach of UK recommendations, and that whilst the church wasn't actually breaking the UK law, they were not taking advantage of all the possible tools that they could use to better manage risks, such as background checks, policies and procedures that could be informed by victims' voices. And we put that all in writing to our bishops and our stake presidents and asked for meetings with each of them so that we could sit with them and talk through them in detail. Now, I actually have currently a fantastic stake president. He's being released at the end of March, so things could look very differently at that point. But I've got a very, very good stake president at the moment who has been incredibly supportive of me as a person and sat and listened. And he was willing to listen to everything that I wanted to talk to him about. The problems that we see with culture of the church and how culture can actually aid and abet abuse within the church. You know, the message of innate authority, somebody's called of God, how that can actually give abusers a green light and silence children, how the high purity and how high shame can actually be a significant barrier to children talking about abuse, and how a lack of information in chapels just says to abusers, oh, nobody here knows about abuse, so I'm probably okay here. I could probably get away with stuff. So we were having those discussions and asking them to respond. Now, my stake president responded in a really positive way, and he said to me, okay, I hear you about posters and information. Tell me what you want, and we'll put posters up in this stake. Fantastic. He was really, really willing to move and do that. He asked me if I would do a training session for his stake council about abuse and about safeguarding, which I've been able to do for every ward in the stake. And I've done that twice for every ward, every stake council and every ward council in our stake. We're just coming to the end of the second round of training, which has been really positive. But that's because locally I have a good stake president who's been really on board with the fact that, yeah, things have to be good. And he's been really keen to focus on making safeguarding a priority. As I say, he's being released on the 23rd of March. I don't know if our next stake president is going to have the same commitment to safeguarding. He may find safeguarding
shoot in the throat for saying nice things about him. Like, yeah, so we've had to promise not even to say nice things. He's that good.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. And
we have really good relationship with local leaders, you know, which and we will come into our story as sort of more broad than that. We have really good relationships throughout the church. We
have challenging conversations with our leaders, very challenging conversations as well. It's not all been rosy. Yeah. The conversations we've had have been very difficult as well.
Yeah, but we have good relationships.
Yeah, I think
we're adorable.
I think at the local level, it is leader roulette, but there are a lot of good leaders out there, and if they were only left to their common sense and intuition, this would often be a no-brainer. It's the way the church does things that begins to sort of suffocate that and keep it from happening. You didn't just have conversations. Please.
It's where the abuse helplines come in. That's where the problem goes wrong.
Yeah,
where abuse goes to die and be covered up. That's where it goes wrong, is when abuse helplines and the lawyers get involved.
The church hotline where abuse goes to die. Yes,
that's where it goes wrong.
Yeah, the moment you get higher ups involved in legal representation with a priority to protect the good name of the church, it is never going to be about helping the victim and stopping the abuse. That's secondary.
I think as soon as any organization prioritizes its reputation over protecting victims, you will always see victim failures. Always. You cannot make victims the center of something and prioritize a good reputation.
Which is ironic, because then you actually, by doing that, tarnish your reputation. But whatever that, I guess that means to them.
Absolutely.
So we do have more to say about the helpline. We are going to come back to that subject a little bit later on. But from here, from the campaign, what we wanted to do was get everyone who had a strong view about it to communicate that view. So we move on in the next slide to our open letter. And you guys all do this.
You guys signed it.
Sarah, just hold
it's a no-brainer.
Spoiler alert. So yeah, we send a letter, pretty much just saying, look, we are looking for more robust safeguarding procedures. People, feel free to screenshot it. Feel free to continue to send this letter out because it's still relevant. And yeah, so we send this on the 21st-ish of August 2022, and we contact people who have views on the subject, people who are podcasting. So on the next page, now this is going to become relevant. On the next page, our wonderful Mormonism Live team, our Bill, our RFM, Mormon Stories, Nemo the Mormon, all of these gangs, Mormon Civil War, all of our Brit Venger gangs and throughout the world, co-signed our petition, allowed us to use their logo, and we really appreciated it. On the next slide, there's some individuals who wanted to add their names, which is a really brave thing to do. I mean, a lot of these people are active church members, and they wanted to make sure that they did that. So yeah, if we move on to,
do you know Charles Christie, Jane?
I know him very well.
Okay, I thought maybe.
Very well.
Oh.
Yeah.
That well.
That well. Yeah. We made babies. Yeah. Okay. Too much information. Yeah, he's my husband, and it's all very above board and very meets with the law of chastity. Okay, so from there, from the next slide, Sarah had you met with your member of parliament. In the UK, our elected representatives, you get at a local level, you get your local councillors, similar to over there. Then the people who meet in Westminster in London, all of those people who meet in Parliament, the members of Parliament. In Scotland and Wales and Ireland, we have our own devolved assemblies too. So Sarah has a member of Parliament, I get a member of Parliament and a member of the Scottish Parliament. So there are a few elected representatives floating around, as I am sure there are for you all over there. But Sarah, do you want to fill them in with this conversation?
Yeah, I contacted my member of Parliament, as did Jane and several other people as well, because we wanted to bring to that particular decision maker understanding that actually you have congregations in your constituency and congregations like the UK where the UK recommended guidance for safeguarding is not being practiced and implemented, where children and young people are at risk of being harmed, and where much more could be done. And can you please go and find out whether the time has come to say there needs to be some government oversight and regulation of faith communities to ensure that safeguarding procedures are followed and taken seriously? So I had a really good conversation with my MP that took things seriously. She wrote to the Home Office Minister for safeguarding. She met with the Home Office Minister. They wrote back to me and said, this is what the government are doing about safeguarding. We've looked at all your information about the church and the concerns that you have. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. And she kind of wrote to the church, which was really interesting. She said she would write to the church and she would ask them what their safeguarding policies and practices were, and she would ask the church to explain what they were going to do in the light of the concerns that we were raising. And she wrote and said, my constituency has spoken to you, has been to see me and spoken about these concerns. She shared these concerns with you as a church, and I'd like to know what your policies and procedures are, what you intend to do about this. And it didn't go well. First of
Everyone
all,
wants
it's
to know what the church
severely,
said.
it really, really upset the church. They didn't like getting a letter from the MP. They got very upset about it. They got quite cross about it, actually. They got quite cross.
Do you want to move to the next slide?
And the end result was...
Can we stop here for just a second? So the member of parliament reaches out to the church and says, hey, you know, in this country, we have asked every church to have safety procedures, safeguarding procedures in place. What are yours? And the answer back was, we don't have any, and leave us alone.
Well, actually, the answer wasn't actually quite, we don't have any. I think the answer was a little more brutal than that. The answer was for Richard H. Page, who actually is a Salt Lake lawyer. So I don't know why he was responding to a British MP, but maybe he had some role that was relevant to make him the right person. I don't understand that. But anyway, so he actually responded, and he said that the reason that they actually weren't entering into communication, and the reason they weren't going to enter into any communication with the MP or provide any information, was that the bishop's responsibilities don't extend to dealing with members of parliament.
Can I just say at this point, Sarah today Sarah's been going for almost 24 hours now. Sarah has spent the entire day training social workers in this extremely difficult subject of responding to abuse and recognizing the signs and indicators.
Yeah.
Sarah is so exhausted that I have never seen this happen. Sarah's naming names tonight. So, Richard Page, you say? Now, tell me something. You've also got in this letter the darling, delightful bishop who had to deal with this. Do you feel
he was lovely?
Tell us, what did he say?
The bishop was really concerned when he got a letter from the MP. He didn't know what to do with it, and he sent it to the stake president, who didn't know what to do with it. So they sent it to the church lawyers, who clearly didn't know what to do with it in the UK, because it ended up with Richard H. Page, who's listed as a Salt Lake lawyer. So
would you tell him what to do?
So a church led by revelation doesn't know what to do when it's being asked to put in policies of safeguarding children and vulnerable populations in its membership.
Well, all the MP wanted to know is, what are your policies and procedures? Can you share them with me? And can you tell me what you are going to do to address the concerns that my constituency has raised with me about the poor lack of safeguarding?
Simple enough.
And the church, and actually, when you think of how the church could have responded.
Isn't it weird? It's like the bishop and the stake president are acting like cockroaches when the light gets turned on.
Well, it's intimidating, right? And that's why I was, Bill, in your role as a bishop, would you have felt intimidated if I don't know, a senator had contacted you and asked you, hey, what are you doing about this?
Because I would think it's the people above me's responsibility to come up with some damn safeguarding. It's not my job. And so I would think that if I reach up to my stake president, he's going to go, oh, don't worry, Bill, we've got this taken care of. We actually have safeguarding in place, and for some reason it's just not in the handbook, but here's this separate manual that goes over all of it, and that's simply not how it works.
No, it isn't. And what the stake president should be saying is, hey, Bill, you dummy, this is the training we've been giving you every 6 months. Have you been asleep for it?
Yeah, it hasn't existed.
That's what it should be.
Right.
So
but it's not. They got nothing.
To pull the bishop out from under the bus, the reality is he genuinely thinks and is being told it is someone else's job, someone above his pay grade, and this is being taken care of. So we can, you know what? Sometimes these guys, you know better, you should do better. We've heard of cases where the bishops have known better and should have acted, and instead of acting in their integrity, they behaved like dicks. They protected their friends. Unfortunately, in this case, it must have been terrifying. And so Sarah is filling in the rest of the Brit Vengers. This was really stressful for this poor bishop. So,
and actually, he was a good man. He was a man that had said in a response to me, I really support your safeguarding campaign and the work that you want to do. I support you. You've got my backing.
Yeah, but my hands are tied. Yep.
Absolutely. He was a man would have done it. Yeah, but you know,
Well,
in the chain of command.
If you have a safeguarding campaign and you realize there's something that might feel a little bit intimidating to get some kind of response, because it was a response, we decided to give that lots more thought. So you're going to hear more about that in a moment. We're going to move on to this is a bit of a sidebar, but it's a really important one. You all need to know about this for a bit of context. So the next slide is where we talk about the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which we are going to refer to as ICSA, because that's what everyone else calls it. And saving time. This inquiry, if anyone is familiar with the situation, there was an extremely high profile entertainer who was heavily involved in the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, and because of his work, he was a household figure, extremely well known, and over a period of many years he had been systematically abusing children. It wasn't until after his death that there was finally the ability for people to come forward and talk about what happened. Now, because the British national broadcaster is at the heart of this, as well as because of his reputation, he was able to access vulnerable children in children's homes, in hospital, very sick children who had experienced difficulties within the family and have to be taken out of the family home. This was a very this was a man who knew what he was doing. So based on that, an operation was launched to investigate his crimes, and one of the things that grew out of that was this independent inquiry. Now, this is the one of the main pages from the website, so take a look at it if it's of any interest to you. But one of the aspects of this inquiry is an inquiry into abuse in religious settings, child abuse specifically in religious settings. You're going to notice that most of the conversations we're having tonight are specifically about abuse of children. We want to make sure that we're keeping in mind vulnerable groups, include adults, the elderly, and we will mention that later. Now, this independent inquiry, ICSA, the religious inquiry was not, so first of all, it's just England and Wales. There isn't a Scottish equivalent or Irish equivalent of this inquiry as yet. 21st century saints have been pushing for a Scottish inquiry in religious settings. And it's for all religions. They contacted every religion in the United Kingdom with any kind of presence and invited them to give testimony and share what they were seeing. They then invited them to share, after the inquiry had released its recommendations, they invited them to share what they had learned. Now, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints did give testimony to the inquiry, and thankfully, it's been a goldmine of information. Just a little bit of a spoiler, the church did not choose to share what it had learned as a result of the inquiry. So it provided testimony as it was asked to do, but chose not to share any learnings from that process, potentially because it did not have any learnings from that process. Sarah, can you share what we learned from the ICSA inquiry as it relates to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Well, we learned that, and Andrew Ford, the bishop that runs the abuse helpline in the UK, he was the solicitor that gave evidence on behalf of the church, and he submitted a very detailed document where he spoke about the origins of the church, the organisation, the structure of the church, some of the central tenets of the church, and he gave information about abuse, and he spoke about the fact that they have a training program, which actually is a 15-minute animated online program, that training session that people do when they're working with youth and children. He spoke about that. He spoke about the church being fully aware that they could have background checks if they wanted, but they felt that they had robust systems in place to protect, and therefore they weren't actually using DBS checks, and they weren't considering doing that. But they would look at that, but they weren't thinking of doing it.
So just to clarify, DBS checks in the UK, we're talking about criminal background checks, just for the American audience, because we tend to get into British language.
And I think they're very different to American background checks as well. So we might talk about that a bit later. But he also gave figures around about sexual abuse in the church. And he said that in the last 10 years, there had been 16 allegations of sexual abuse. Now, that's allegations of sexual abuse, 16 in 10 years. In the UK, there's roughly 500,000 sexual abuse concerns, allegations, assessments around children every year that are looked at. Right, 500,000 every year.
How many wards?
The church ended up with 16.
Yeah, how many wards and stakes are there?
I think there's about 385. Is it, Jane? 300.
There were 385 at one point. There's probably, since we started, we've probably lost another 3. So I don't know. I think there's maybe 350-ish, but.
Since Sarah's the expert, Sarah, if I just ask you the direct question, since you're the expert, the church says through its solicitor that they've had 16 reports in the last 10 years. What would it actually be if the Latter-day Saints were following the statistical average of those kind of reports?
At a low estimate, you'd have 1 in 20 children, and they say there's 127,000 active members in the UK, 150,000 members. So you'd have 1 in 20
per year.
And we all understand, we all get that the system diminishes the amount of cases that come to the surface. The processes and mechanisms of Mormonism and how the faith operates diminish the number of cases that would come to the point where they would even make this sort of report.
Yeah, and I want to pursue this. Sarah, were you saying 120 per year would be the average for Mormons to report child sexual abuse?
Well, we know that a very low estimate is around 1 in 20 children experience sexual abuse every year. Now, I'm not sure what the numbers of what they reckon about 150,000 members in the UK. Now,
how many would be kids?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I honestly don't know. But if you take a quarter of those being children, you imagine a quarter might be children. I don't know if that would be a reasonable number. Then that's going to get you a lot more than 2 children a year, isn't it? 1.5 children a year.
And on top of that, that same person said that out of 16 allegations in the past 10 years, only 3 of them had proceeded to any kind of church discipline. Is that correct?
Yeah. And what was interesting is the actual table that showed what the allegation was and what the discipline was hasn't been made public. So although that was spoken about, nobody's actually seen that. So even with the evidence that was given, there wasn't full transparency over it. I believe there was an attempt to be helpful to the inquiry and participate as a church and give information, but the figures are incredulous, really. And every time you speak to anyone about those figures, you actually end up with... I did training just in one ward in my stake recently, and 2 people in that one training session said, well, I know more than 10 people.
Right.
There was 2 people in one ward that said they knew of more than 10 people. So they said, and people are saying, where's that figure come from? So it does confuse people.
It does. And I think it's really important to highlight also that this is actually a really problematic thing, because children, it's so hard for a child to disclose abuse. And even if you were to look at any organization, the number that you would probably find is is probably quite low. There's all sorts of barriers, as Sarah's been talking about all day today, about why children don't disclose. The difficulty is we don't appear to be recognizing it in the church in order to even be able to look at preventing it. So their measurements appear to be off. It's a statistical impossibility. What we don't have is someone asking the question, okay, how accurate are those numbers? How can we make sure that we really are? Those are just calls that are going to the helpline. Those aren't, we don't know at what level, what's the threshold that you're counting it as an instance of abuse. But what we would tend to see is members of the church who would say, well, you know what, this is the true church, and we have temple recommend holders here. It's just not a problem in our church. That's what I have continually heard through our life. It's not a problem in our church. It's not a problem in this ward. And let me tell you, since we started this work, oh my God, it is a problem in your ward. Even if you haven't thought about it in terms of abuse, almost everybody we have spoken to has some kind of experience where they have witnessed or heard. Everybody knows these conversations are happening. So we have a lot of questions about how that information is being recorded and how abuse is being defined.
And I think that's the key.
The other thing.
What are they counting?
Yeah. The other thing, and this is bringing our story back on track. So the other thing that we learned from this testimony, to help the audience also, Curtin McConkie is how most people understand the church helpline. So the church helpline, wherever you are in the USA, is run by Curtin McConkie. That isn't the case here in the UK. The church helpline is run by an individual, and that individual is Andrew Ford, who is very popular, very well loved. We have concerns about the victim-centric and follow-through of support that he offers, but he does very clearly say, if you think a child is at risk, call the police. So there are good things that are happening there. However, there are problems. Now, Andrew Ford, in his testimony to the ICSA inquiry, made it clear, makes a statement that says, the church's position is that bishops are responsible for answering questions about their own safeguarding policies. That in a ward level, which is equivalent to a congregation, the person responsible is the bishop, and a stake level, which is akin to a diocese, the person responsible is the stake president. Now that's
overseeing, not just answering questions, but overseeing the safeguarding, which is even more significant.
I think Jane was going to compare that with somebody in Salt Lake City.
Well, I am going to move swiftly on because it's a bit difficult for me to have conversations about Andrew Ford when the little guy's doing his best. So,
I know, but what you were saying was, and I don't want to lose that point, which is that that's exactly the opposite of what that dude in Salt Lake City, what was his name again, Sarah?
Oh, Richard H. Page.
Thank you, Richard H. Page. What he told you, what he said, it's not the bishop's responsibility.
Into a fight, RFM. If this becomes fisticuffs, it will be on your head yet. Okay, we will do it.
So Richard H. Page said that the bishops aren't responsible for the safeguards, and Richard H. Page said that the stake president isn't responsible for the safeguards. And now you've got the guy who's in charge of the safeguards throughout England writing in a written document signed under penalty of perjury that Richard H. Page is a big fat liar. Is that right?
See, we have to have conversations with lawyers all the time. We're trying to be nice, but no, that you're holding our feet to the fire. Okay, you're exactly right, RFM. Yes. One of the other has got it very, very wrong. And what I would respectfully suggest is the person that has got it wrong is the person who didn't want to answer the damn question in the first place. The bishops didn't have the training, who should have been able to answer that question, because what we would find in any diocese, any church, any building, any employer, any school, the person that is in charge of safeguarding is the person who's being paid to manage all. Your first job, first and foremost, in any organization, is to keep the people within it safe. That is a bishop's responsibility.
If the bishop doesn't know what the safeguarding procedures and rules are, how in the hell is he supposed to be enforcing them?
Well, you see, that is something we decided we had to do something about.
Yes.
We were very concerned. We were concerned for our bishops. Yeah. We were really concerned for our bishops that the church have told a government
lay leaders
that the bishop is responsible.
These guys didn't go to seminary school. These guys did, and I don't mean seminary. Mormons think, oh, seminary. Yeah, you did. No, you goofball. In the world, seminary is the place that grown adults go to learn the ethics of how they're going to go out into the world and be in some sort of religious context as a pastor, as a minister, and they're going to go to seminary and they're going to learn the right and wrong of how they do that. In Mormonism, you have the local plumber scratching his ass and his pants are hanging off his crack. And he's called by discernment to be the bishop of the ward, and he gets thrown in, because I was just a carpet salesman. That's even worse. He gets thrown in, and on day one, it's like I talk to God as a carpet salesman, and I get to lead the ward, and I got to come up with all the things. Expecting the bishop or the stake president to come up with all the safeguarding is so intentionally deficient. It is, you are taking the guy being thrown into a religious position with zero training, and you're pointing the finger at him, throwing him under the bus and saying, that's the guy, go look at him. No, this is a top-down church. And if the top created a great list of safeguarding protocols, every bishop would have access to that and would only be in trouble if they weren't utilizing them.
Well, we had real concerns that the bishops didn't know that we had concerns that the bishops didn't know they were responsible for safeguarding. We thought, hang on, the church has just told a government inquiry that they're responsible for safeguarding and the overseeing of all safeguarding in their area. We're not convinced that most bishops even know that, and that they know they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for it. So we decided something had to be done about that lack of knowledge. Right. In fairness to the bishops, we felt that wasn't fair for them not to know.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next slide, I spent a few moments earlier on defending bishops because they are being told the opposite, because they genuinely have been told that it's not their problem, someone else is dealing with this. Where I have a huge problem, and we used tamer language as initially, when you have a bishop, when you have members of the church and you've been hanging out in the elders quorum and your status is tied up in church, and there's a lot of bragging that happens about a lot of humble bragging about how much studying that you're doing and how really deeply you know these scriptures, and you've got the whole works of McConkie on your shelf, and isn't it fantastic? And you're going to tell me that at no point have you checked what your legal responsibility is to your calling? At no point did you bother to check that. Because let me tell you what you did do, Bishop. Back when it was COVID season, you were all on the phone to headquarters. You were all you were all speaking to your state presidents, your file leaders, your area presidencies, and you were telling people that you weren't comfortable being responsible for having people show up at church, and it may come back on you. You were concerned about your obligations then, but at this point, when it comes to child safety, it didn't occur to you to go look it up. Shame on you. Shame on you. So, like I say, these are things that are being brought to people's attention. And I think if you don't know what your legal responsibility is, and you've been sending your kid to football camp and not noticing there's a discrepancy, or you've been sending your kid to school and noticing how much more robust their policies are, and you're going to tell me you don't know what the law says, then I would respectfully suggest that maybe you haven't really wanted to know in the first place. So we want to move on to the next slide, which is
Jane, I really think you put your finger on something important. We don't want to know.
Right.
We don't want to know. It's happening over there. in private. We can't see it. We're going to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist because it's the righteous thing to do. I know that sounds totally crazy. Bear with me. In Mormonism, when I joined the church and the national divorce rate for Mormons married in the temple was lower than for everybody else, that is a sign that the church is true. When you look at the statistics that in Utah, people live longer than God, right? Plus anywhere else on the planet. You know what I mean? That is a testimony that the church is true. And when you have only 3 people in 10 years who go to a disciplinary council out of 16 reported, when you've got a ton more in any other demographic outside the church, that is a testimony that the church is true. So to acknowledge that it's as bad in the church as outside the church and take steps to try and safeguard as you're doing ends up being viewed by this twisted reasoning as a lack of faith and a lack of righteousness.
And I'm just going to say this. If you have a church of lay leaders, you have a culture of lack of transparency, you have top-down sort of leadership, you've got a distaste and distrust for outsiders. You take there's 100 more components of Mormonism that almost certainly make abuse more prevalent in the Mormon church than it is at the local Methodist building down the street.
Right.
And so to say like it's better, yeah, the only way they can portray it as better is to turn a blind eye to it, because it is inevitably worse in a Mormon ward building than it is in any other, in 85% of any other religion in town.
I think we have significant more barriers in our church. Any high-demand religion has significant barriers to children being able to speak out about abuse.
Yes.
And those barriers are about a high shame, purity, around attitudes, values about sex, around the teachings that we have about innate authority of leaders, about being told you can't criticize because it's wrong to criticize leaders. Well, how do you tell about abuse if you can't criticize a leader? So a lot of the cultural things that we do make telling and talking about abuse very much more problematic for our children and youth and parents and adults than it does for some other groups. I do actually think that we've got the vast majority of leaders at a local level, bishop and stake president level, do not want children to be abused. They want children to be safe. They want children to be healthy. They want children to enjoy church. But I don't think they're being supported by the institution of the church sufficiently to be able to implement that. I think they want it. I believe they want that. I really believe that. And talking to so many of them, as we've done over the last couple of years, they are concerned and they're worried. But the institution of the church is not giving them all of the tools and all of the training and all of the information that they need to help them discharge with all due diligence their responsibility to safeguard.
Absolutely. When we go to the next slide, we're invited to speak at our first national conference, and what we do, I mean, you know, I was being very direct there. In essence, we're saying something very similar in a much, much nicer way, but it is time for the church, for local leaders and for more senior leaders to get their heads out of their asses. You need to be doing more. You need to know what you're talking about. And there are all of these things that you're missing. But we know that you want to make it better. I mean, we are members of the church, and certainly we both were at this point, and the church means a lot to us, and we would hear, you know, just leave, there's no point. There are people who are in the church who it means a lot to. There are children in this church, there are vulnerable people in this church, it's an aging population. We can all agree we want to keep those people safe, right? I don't care where you stand in the church. So we were asked to speak about Mormonism and safeguarding. And as we felt like this was a really good opportunity, not just the conference, which was going to be happening in something like March. We wanted to use this as an opportunity to tell our church leaders, hey, we've been asked to speak at this conference. How would you like to come and get a preview, and we can share with you what we're planning to say? So we used the ICSA testimony from Andrew Ford, and we were highlighting what we saw as inconsistencies. We were highlighting areas for improvement. We were also emphasizing areas of good practice. For example, we know that record annotations, we know record annotations are extremely problematic. However, when we're thinking about the subject of safeguarding, not a lot of churches have the ability to annotate a member record so that no matter which congregation in the world of that religion you walk into, that annotation is going to be on your record. So the way it theoretically would work is there is some kind of warning system in place that travels along with a member. That's pretty good practice. It needs some thought, it needs some more discussion, but so we wanted to talk about what the church was doing and to sort of empower the church and embolden the church that if you have a look at ICSA, have a look at the recommendations, and there was a load of recommendations they had. Have a look at, consider implementing some of these recommendations. Consider having discussions about these recommendations. Even before you get to implementing them, you need to know why you would be implementing them. You need to know if you choose not to implement something, you need to be very clear on why you're not implementing it. And you have to have a very bloody good reason why you're not. So we wanted to encourage that discussion and for the church to feel safe that we can have a discussion about safeguarding. If the church implemented those recommendations, the church, which would say it's a world leader, it's got a gold standard of safeguarding, which we know isn't true, then the church will get to be where it wants to be and could be viewed as a world leader in safeguarding. Or wouldn't that be something to really, really aspire to? That would be a great goal to set. Now, when we had the presentation, we did have a couple of our local leaders did show up, but also 3 lawyers showed up. Sarah, do you want to, since you're naming and shaming, do you want to say anything about the lawyers?
What were the names of the lawyers, Sarah?
One of them was Andrew Ford. One of them was John Craig. One of them, he's the blessed John Craig. He's wonderful. And I'm not being sarcastic with that. He's wonderful. And the other one, I don't know who the other one was. I can't remember his name, but I wonder if it was this Richard H. Page. And that is just curiosity on my part. I'm not sure who, but I can't remember the name of the other lawyer. And then we had a couple of state presidents that turned up.
Yeah. Who loved us. I mean, everyone thought we were adorable, but describe.
Absolutely. Everyone loves us.
Assuming the person that we're talking about is indeed Monsieur Page. How do you feel that he was enjoying the presentation? Do you think he was getting a lot out of it?
No, I don't think he enjoyed it. I think he looked. I don't know if it was a time difference, if he was actually in Salt Lake City at the time and not in the UK, but everyone else was in the UK. And whoever this person was, and I don't know if it was the elusive Mr. Richard H. Page, who doesn't like members of Parliament in the United Kingdom, or if it wasn't, but if it was him, he looked extraordinarily bored and actually looked as though he was falling asleep at one point. And I mean, Jane and I are quite entertaining, so I don't know how he would have.
Well, it was the middle of the night in Salt Lake.
To fall asleep.
It was the middle of the night in Salt Lake, like it is there right now, where you are.
Well, and I've actually been. I've been up since 7 o'clock this morning, so I've been up for nearly 24 hours, and I'm managing to not fall asleep. But yes, I think he was a bit bored with our presentation. I think he was a little bit bored. Everybody else was kind of fully engaged and listened to everything that we had to say, and we were able to use it as an opportunity to share the concerns that we had about safeguarding and to actually look at the things we were requesting the church to do and the changes that we wanted to see the church make. So we were able to use it. I think it's worth mentioning that how we got to be invited to speak at that national conference. We've spoken at quite a few national conferences now around religion and safeguarding. That came about because of a children's charity that we were working with called the NWG in the United Kingdom, that is called the National Working Group, and they focus on child sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse. And they had seen some of our work and were aware of the work we were doing, and they approached us and said, come, let's start having discussions. And they asked if we'd speak at a conference. And it's kind of gone from there. We've spoken quite a few now. We did a presentation a little while ago on positions of trust and abuse in the Mormon Church. And we did something else. Can't remember what we did.
Yes,
now.
we're adorable.
We've got another. Oh, we've been asked to speak at another conference in, I think it's actually March. I think we've been asked to speak at another conference.
So yeah, he did look a bit bored, but it was actually really well received, and we had a really good experience. We think the people who showed up, certainly really good feedback. But then we did a thing. So this is the next slide.
Does this involve a letter?
It involves a few, more than one letter.
385.
Yeah.
385 letters it involved. Yeah. And that was a lot of stamps and a lot of envelopes.
Handwritten envelopes, yes. And so because this issue of people, bishops, stake presidents not knowing who was responsible for safeguarding still hadn't been resolved. There wasn't any action that had been agreed from the lawyers. We were talking a lot about this. So
I'm guessing, by the way, I'm guessing that the bishops and stake presidents didn't clearly understand that in some places they were the ones being pointed to as being responsible for safeguarding, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. And so we wanted to tell them that they did. So yeah, we quoted the church's information. That's the bottom of that second page that's kind of cut off there is that's some screenshots from the government website, which we invited them to go and take a look at so that they could clarify that the information that we were sending them was absolutely correct. Keep in mind, this was off the back of the fact that Sarah has seen what happens when you contact a bishop directly and tell them there's a problem. So we realized that direct communication was really, it got a reaction. We were chatting with the rest of the Brit Vengers, and Sarah had said, I'm going to write to my bishop to tell him what his responsibility is, and then Julian had said, I think you should write to every bishop, and so the game was afoot. We did, yeah,
we did.
Really, you're not making this up. What you're doing, if I understand it correctly, Sarah, is you're telling all the stake presidents and all the bishops in the United Kingdom what it is that the Mormon attorney who fields all of these calls and provided that testimony to the ICSA hearing, right, said that it is the bishop's responsibility and it's the stake president's responsibility to safeguard.
That's right. And that's all we wanted to do. And I had a conversation with my bishop and told him that. And it was a difficult conversation because he'd only just been called as bishop and he didn't know any of this and he was completely unaware of it and had no knowledge at all. So I thought, well, I'm going to put it in writing to him. And that's when Julian said, well, don't just write to your bishop, write to every bishop in the country. But we just felt that they needed to know what the church, and we thought there's no harm in telling them. The church have said you're responsible for safeguarding. So there's no harm if we give them some links and some further information on where they can find out about what they're responsible for. So we
wanted them to feel concerned. We wanted them to know that this is incredibly serious, and that now some of the languages in this is, and just to clarify, because there's a point we want to highlight, if a bishop, if an individual knowingly employs or assigns someone as a volunteer to work with a vulnerable group, to work with children, and that person has been barred from working with children. If a bishop knowingly does that, they are subject to a hefty fine and time in jail. So we told them that in the letter, and
Now
of
that's
course they got a
regardless of whether
reaction.
there's actually a subsequent CSA.
That is again
Yeah.
the
It's
emphasis on the word
regardless. It's
knowingly. Sarah,
regardless.
Regardless of whether
Yeah, it's
there's any kind of
yeah,
crime that is
yeah. There
committed by
doesn't
the
have to
person
be.
who he should have known was
Yeah,
dangerous.
doesn't have to be any further
Right.
crimes committed at all. If somebody's on what's called in the UK the barred list, which means they are not legally allowed to work with children or young people, and somebody is aware that they're not supposed to work with children or young people and allows them to either in a volunteer or paid position undertake that work, then whether or not that person commits a further offence is an irrelevance. It's the act of allowing that person to be in a position where they possibly could that can lead to a fine and 5 years imprisonment. And we thought, well, actually, bishops, has anyone told you that if you know somebody in your congregation actually has a conviction and you are not keeping them well away from children and young people, you could be in a lot of trouble? Has anyone told you? Do you know that?
Yeah. So
I
testimony.
would want to know
time-
that if I were a bishop in England.
Well,
Right.
absolutely. And we
Yes.
also wanted bishops to feel that they had information that they could then start asking questions about, and that they could then go to their stake presidents and their area authorities and say, we need to understand more about safeguarding. We need more training. We need more information. So we wanted bishops to be absolutely aware of what they could be doing that could make a greater difference to safeguarding, because I believe it's in their heart to want children to be safe. But we just thought, let's give you some tools on how you can discharge that duty more effectively.
Right.
Well,
So what
congrats.
was the response?
So we
Was
wrote a
everybody
lot of
happy?
letters.
Well, before,
Oh,
first of all,
wow.
we just have to be a testimony of the fact that, first of all, thank you so much, because the stamps were all paid for and donated by people who were supporting the campaign. So that was huge. The envelopes went into the mail. I mean, this was really late at night, like really late.
Yeah.
The post office was closing. The next morning, these were being received by bishops all over the United Kingdom the next morning, which is just, it's, you know, if you're the miraculous believing sort, I think that would count as
It
one.
works better than our postal system here, that's for sure.
Well, we've never
Yeah.
seen anything like that.
Well,
The stamps were
It's a much
actually
it
smaller
worked better
country,
than
though.
us usually.
the stamps were all the stamps were Marvel heroes, believe it or
Yes.
not. It was,
Yay.
I mean, it
Yeah.
was, everything was
I think-
meant to be. So
The letters
How
were
did it go
literally Godspeed. How did it go down?
Right.
Well, we had a lot of bishops and stake presidents and bishops' wives and Relief Society presidents who heard about this contact us and say things like, I didn't know my husband was responsible for this, and what's going on here? And I just want to let you know that I'm taking safeguarding seriously and I'm really worried about this. So we had lots and lots of different people contact us and talk to us about how the letter had left them feeling. Then we did the lawyers. Do you remember Jane and I had a mem little made a little while ago that kind of showed a picture of Jesus, and it said, like, you know, it's okay, Jesus had trouble with lawyers too. And I think that's a little bit of a thing that Jane and I need to hold on to, that Jesus had trouble with lawyers in the same way as we've had trouble with lawyers. They weren't
Well,
very
Jesus,
pleased.
little known fact in the Book of Mormon, it says that Jesus went to the Jerusalem School of Law. Of course, the problem is they only had a school of law in Bethlehem.
right.
It's an Alma 710 joke. Never mind. Go ahead.
They were so pissed off. They were really
were.
not. And what I think
were
what we had
cross.
the biggest issue with, I mean, honestly, we debated bringing the letter on because it is just, we read this letter when we need a good chuckle in life. It is so funny. They are so disappointed in us because they thought we had. Sarah, yeah.
I was just going to say, let me just share, because it is funny. Let me share it. It's so funny. It makes us laugh every time.
Are
One
you
of the
going to
things that the
share
lawyers
it?
wrote to us about. I'm going to share this bit. One of the things that the lawyers wrote to us and complained about was that we'd invaded the privacy of the bishops of the country, and they would have to investigate how this breach of privacy had arisen, and that it was unacceptable that we'd breached their privacy. So we wrote back. We responded to every comment that they made in their letter, and we wrote back to them with our.
So they're more concerned with safeguarding
back
the
and said,
they're more concerned with safeguarding the bishops
they were really
than safeguarding children.
Well,
yeah.
Can I put a fine point on that one? This is so relevant, okay? Because this was a complaint about sending unsolicited mail to bishops. So you know the job that missionaries do, the thing that the church is known for. They had a problem with us sending a letter to them. I mean, understandably, they were deeply concerned about how we got the addresses. Now, this is where like our little buddy Nemo comes in. He literally spent hours going through the ward meeting house locator and one by one entering every single one of those letters so that we could then handwrite it. So Nemo did that for us, and he's amazing. But yeah, that was publicly available information from the church's website.
So we pointed that out to the lawyers. So we pointed that out to the lawyers, and I explained in the letter, and I said, well, what we actually did was went through the church website that is publicly available on the internet. We got the address, the name and address of every single bishop because it's on the website, and we use that publicly available information to send the letters. Therefore, nobody's privacy was invaded. And if your bishops have been really anxious and concerned about this, then I'm really sorry that you didn't feel able to reassure them earlier on. And by the way, I'm not taking lessons from this church in privacy, when the entire operating model of this church is one that is focused on not respecting privacy. I'm not taking lessons from you on privacy. So we did write back and sort of say, hang on a minute. But the letters, there's actually a YouTube video where we did go through on Nemo's channel, where we went through the letter in detail, sentence by sentence, and our response to it. So if anybody wants to have something to really have some fun with, it's worth watching that video.
Okay, well, Sarah, Jane, and Bill, I've got a question for you. When was the last time you got a piece of mail that you solicited?
That's true. I don't
think I ever get mail. I get all kinds of mail I don't want, but I don't get mail I solicit.
Yeah.
Please send me that letter.
We were told we weren't allowed to write to anyone again.
Yeah, they did mention that.
They did tell us that we were not to write. That we were not.
I think the mail system is composed almost entirely of unsolicited mail.
Right.
So they were.
Yeah. So they were extremely hurt.
Is that right?
We were told not to do it again, but what they did was to stress how hurt they were about it, that we had a relationship, and that, you know, we would have expected you to let us know if you were going to do something like this. And, you know, realistically, of course, there was no relationship. They like us to think that they communicate with us, but it's been very, very one way. So yes, sometimes they give us the time of day, sometimes they don't. And yeah, they were really hurt. But the other thing that was very significant, and if you guys can recall back to when we talked about the open letter, well, apparently this must have been the first time they decided to read the damn thing, because one of the things they complain about is the fact that they've looked at our open letter now and they've seen who has co-signed it. And clearly these are people who have some kind of agenda against the church, and this is deeply concerning to them. And it just shows everything in a slightly different light. So yeah, they were upset at who our friends were. They didn't like who our friends were.
And they actually said that. And they actually said that in the letter, that we're really concerned about who you are associating with.
Really? That's like saying Attila the Hun wanted to protect children, therefore it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Well,
we did point that out. We did actually point out that actually, but we did point out to them in our response was actually, this agenda has brought together never Mormons, ex-Mormons, and active Mormons in a united front to say safeguarding has to improve. And actually who our friends are, if they're prepared to stand up for safeguarding, it doesn't matter whether they're an ex-Mormon, an anti-Mormon, a truly engaged Mormon, it doesn't matter.
Why is it that these people specifically, have to be persuaded that protecting kids is a good idea? Why are they going to resist it with all these ridiculous arguments, like who signed it or sponsored
I
it or
think they,
co-signed it?
I think they believe protecting children is a very good idea. What they don't like is any discussion about the fact that children need to be protected in the church. That's what upsets them. Is any
Well, but they
discussion that
don't.
it's needed.
What they don't like is Bill Reel and RFM. Let's just be clear. Like we can think about
Signing a
kids,
letter.
but no, if they're involved. Let's move on. We conducted a small scale survey of abuse in the church in the UK. Now, we're not going to say a tremendous amount about that, other than it was very, very simply done. This was a survey that didn't ask, are you a member of the church? It's just simply asking, have you experienced abuse in the church? And did you feel that your leaders knew what to do? And is there anything that you would like to tell us? And we provided links to support services. The reason we did that is because we are constantly asked about prevalence. We're constantly asked for a little bit of data about it. So in a small way, this was a sort of self-selecting survey. And so we have these quotes from people who have experienced abuse in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and nothing we can say in any of the work that we do, nothing will be more important than the things these people are saying to us. Now, I mentioned the survivor who started our entire campaign. She shared just a few weeks ago with us that she was able to share her story with a therapeutic service. And she said, for the first time, I feel clean. Now, I think that is something that our church leaders need to hear. I think that's a really significant statement, especially in light of the doctrines of the church. To be able to share your story is huge, and it's our job to amplify their voices. So yes, we are contacted at this point by people in the UK on a weekly basis. Also around the world, our work focuses on the UK, but we do obviously note and signpost people from around the world who do get in touch with us. At one point, Sarah and I are taking a little bit of a much needed break, and we spend a day with some ex-Mormons having a bit of a kickback and just having fun, not talking about abuse specifically. Over the course of around about 6 hours, 25% of the people who attended came and spoke to Sarah about their personal abuse experiences in the church. Now, that is quite the figure. And that's the people who approached Sarah. We weren't by any means sort of taking a poll or, the need to talk is important.
That was on a relaxed day when people were there to just enjoy themselves. And it's a pattern that I've found wherever I go, whatever chapel I walk into and turn up at church, somebody somewhere will come and talk to me about something that has either happened to them or that they know happened to a family member or a friend, or a case of abuse that they're aware of. And sometimes that's been sexual abuse, sometimes it's been financial abuse of an elderly relative, it's been abuse across the spectrum. But people are constantly coming forward with stories, examples, concerns that they have.
So that absolutely sums up her experience too. And actually in any organisation, in any charity that is working in the field of safeguarding, when you start talking about abuse, people start to disclose just by having the conversation, just by being able to ask the question. It's highly significant. Now, if we move on to the next slide, Sarah, I'm going to get you to summarize this because this, so we sent out the letters in January, and this was May or June. Sarah, do you wanna fill us in?
Yeah, it was 6 months 6 months after we sent the bishop's letters out, that we had communication from the church to inform us that they were going to start undertaking background checks as from the 1st of June 2023. So 6 months after the bishop's letters. So I think that was a significant motivation for the church to act and to start putting something in place. They set up a safeguard.
Can I just jump in and say,
Yep.
your initiative seems to have caused, on some level, the church in the UK to go forward with creating and implementing and announcing safeguarding policy. Is that correct?
Well,
well,
yeah, it would appear that way. It would appear that back in 2019, when testimony was given to the government inquiry, the church went undertaking DBS checks and had no intention of undertaking DBS checks, although they knew all about them and they knew how they could do it if they wanted to, but they actually felt they had other safeguards in place and didn't need to. They also didn't see the need to have anybody called or serving in a position to assist stake presidents around safeguarding work within a stake. And then we made those recommendations to the church and said, you really need to do background checks, and this is why, and this is how you do them, and this is the advantage. And by the way, stake presidents are busy people who could do with somebody to help them with all this safeguarding. And while you're at it, can you please get some enhanced training in place? And we made those recommendations in writing, in personal conversations, in discussions with church. And 6 months later, the church, it was almost 12 months later from when we started in August 2022 to June 2023, the church implemented all those policies. So
let's emphasize this. Let's emphasize this too. The church did not have to do this.
Yes. Yeah.
They did not have to do this. Absolutely.
It was not legally required.
Yeah. So while there is a lot happening in the background legally about safeguarding and things just now, certainly at this point, no, they did not have to do this. What we have is this beautiful, perfect combination of Sarah and I being, we're supporting them. We're being very direct, calling out problems that we're seeing, but we're also telling them, here's some really good stuff you could be improving on this. Here's what you could be doing. Here are these guidelines. Keep coming back to this. Here's what the government is able to say. We're encouraging you to work with external organizations. Alongside us being pains in the ass, we've also got church leaders who are who've caught the vision, who understand that this is really important. We've got podcasters, we've got podcasters across the world who are talking about this, everyone came together to make this happen. So yeah, it's really nice to say, obviously we played a huge part in it, but if it was not for ex-Mormons, if it was not for really good church leaders, if it was not for the willingness for everyone to get on the same page with it, this had to be a work where we were all working together. Now, the next slide.
It's very gracious of you, Jane. I will add, but without you two, it never would have happened.
Well,
it's okay to admit I'm right.
We ain't done. There's more to come. So this next slide. This is because this is our moment where it's a bit like showing a picture of a kitten. This is a bit of a palate cleanser that will make you all say "ah," but then will also make you all furious.
That's Nemo going to church.
Sarah,
this is Nemo.
Sorry, Sarah, on you go.
Yeah, because this is a photo of Nemo and me attending church on the Sunday that I was set apart as the stake safeguarding specialist. So I was called as stake safeguarding specialist. Nemo is a friend of mine, and he said, I'll come to church and be with you when you're called and when you're set apart for this, because it's kind of really hugely significant and something that you've worked really hard towards wanting, I'm going to be there for you. He came to church with me that morning.
Yes.
And when I went into the bishop's office to be set apart, the high councillor that had come from the stake to set me apart, I said, would it be okay if my friend Dougie joins in the circle and stands in the circle with us when you set me apart? And the high councillor agreed to that. He was like, yeah, that's fine. That's it. He knew Dougie. He'd been Dougie's young men's president when Dougie was a youth. So he knew him well. And he agreed. He said, yeah, he can stand in the circle with you, which he did. And it was a good moment. It was a good morning. But it didn't go down very well, really.
What do you mean?
Sarah, do you know that you're even name dropping Nemo the Mormon right now? I am loving you when you stay up late. It is beautiful to behold.
Do you know?
It's
depriving
Just remind me never to tell you my real name.
Well, actually, don't, because I tell the world, because nobody would ever know unless I told them.
Get a couple drinks into Sarah.
She never does this. Okay,
By the way, it looks like
Sarah,
there's an alcohol bottle over your left shoulder there, Sarah. Is that
there's
true?
a bottle of whiskey.
Yes.
There's a bottle of whiskey. I could deny all ownership of it and blame it on my grandson Harry.
I drop everybody's name after a few shots too, so I get it.
By the way, Sarah, I want to hear what you have to say, but is it true that when that when Nemo showed up for the meeting, that he was the only one who voted opposed?
for your calling.
Is it true that when he showed up at the meeting for you, you're calling, that he's the only one who voted opposed?
No, he didn't.
He stood on his chair and he burst into tears.
He's
a very emotional guy. Yeah, he gets very emotional.
Now, Sarah, you were about to dish on why it was that this didn't go over so well.
Well, I had a phone call from somebody not long after this to say, how did this happen? How did it happen that Dougie was involved in this setting apart? So I explained how it had happened. But apparently this person had been put under pressure for, hang on, this really should not have happened.
He should not have been in the circle?
Right. And then very soon after that, almost immediately after that, that was when Dougie was told by his bishop that he could not exercise his priesthood any longer.
Oh my gosh, but it's not a legalistic religion.
Well, and I actually can't possibly for 1 second say that there's a correlation between the church leadership being upset that Nemo participated in setting me apart and him then being told he couldn't exercise his priesthood. I mean, that just might be a coincidence. I don't know.
No. Who had a problem with Nemo being in the circle? Sarah, who was that?
Excellent question. Yeah.
Was it Peter Bleakley?
It was no, it was actually the church lawyers that were upset about it. I'm not really sure what it has to do with the church lawyer who participates in setting anyone apart. But apparently the concern was it was making safeguarding look as though there was an activist narrative attached to it. And the church were concerned about the activist narrative that was growing up around
the church is concerned about everything except protecting the kids.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. At some point, someone just got to yell it.
Well, the activist narrative was a problem.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here and just note, if you go to the church's website, if you go into Google and type in safeguarding LDS, and I put the word ladder, L-A-T-T-E-R, to see if I could find something. You guys have your own branch of a website from the church. So
we do.
This is, notice in the top left corner, this is United Kingdom and Ireland.
That was something that came out. Yeah, when they introduced new policies, they set up a new website.
Yeah. My point is that
it's actually very good. It is good.
Yeah. My point is that they had the time, energy, ability to create the entire safeguarding program for you guys, but they still don't want to. It's like, let's just let them use it, and we're not gonna do that over here on this side of the pond. And you get, criminal record checking, UK.
I love that though. It says criminal record checking, but only in the United Kingdom.
Safeguarding policies and procedures outside the UK and Ireland, so they have their own set in Ireland, in the UK, and then you come down here to the hotlines, and I have a hunch that your hotline, they might answer the phone and handle it differently than our hotline here on this side of the pond. One might be what the UK is saying they should be doing things, and the other one is Burton and McConkie hiding abuse. So,
Hey, Jane,
Well, what I
Jane,
would
could you
say
call
is
Andrew
I
Ford right now? Could you call Andrew Ford right now and let's see
I
what he does?
knew you were gonna do this.
How did you know that? I didn't know it till the second.
Radio Free Mormon. Honestly, people, please don't call that number because you will get through to the mobile phone of Andrew Ford
Or his son.
and he's a very
this time of night you will, huh?
he 24 hours.
Let's wake him up.
hours.
Let's wish Andrew a good morning.
This is the same
let
guy
him
who gave out the
sleep.
number to the SDMC, if you
What I
remember.
would say is he will, Andrew Ford, and this I will say, Andrew Ford will absolutely tell you to report abuse. He will say very clearly, if you are aware of abuse, you must report it.
All the cops, yes. Anyway, I wanted to just draw attention to the church's ability to do things, but keep it only where they have to keep it, and not widespread distribution of safeguarding policies for kids. So,
well,
anyway.
Let me just jump to a quick complaint because actually we're about to move on to that. Sarah's going to tell us about how safeguarding in the UK, how it looks today. That website that you pulled up there, it has a phenomenal link. Now, it's far from perfect. We did have to let them know. You guys know on there you've got the talk where it talks about how you need to think about if you're responsible for your own abuse. We had to message immediately to say no, get that down. Maybe think about having some women on there. And they did.
But
they
did. It. Yeah, they did.
Yeah. So it's not an amazing website, but on there is a PDF. And what we've been asking for is, because it's generally very good, it involves external organizations, the NSPCC, the National Society for Protection for Cruelty to Children, which is very, very good. You can find out more about your business on there. They have it's just PDF form. They email to say you can find this here. Now, PDFs, they're okay, but I mean, if you can print out all of the Book of Mormon copies that you print out, get a copy of this to every bishop and state president who needs to have it in their hands. Get it to Relief Society presidents. Make sure there's copies of this in the foyers. This is a really good document. Spend some money, print it out, get it into their hands, please. We are doing it with the document that we've produced, and if we can do it, then you have no excuse. So please make sure that's available. And if you are a bishop or stake president or a leader in the church, a member in the church, email and ask them, print it out, please. It's really good. Sarah, safeguarding, how is it looking right now?
I think in the UK, what we're seeing at the moment is that the DBS checks are going well. There's probably been about 8,000 DBS checks done. They're happening. They're going well. People are no longer allowed to serve in accordance with youth or children unless those background checks have been done. And until the checks have been done and it's uploaded onto the membership records. Yeah,
Sarah, can I jump in and get you just to say specifically about DBS checks? So it's going well. Was it always going well? And can you give a sense of how the church may be feeling that it's been going?
Yeah, I think when background checks were first introduced, there was a mix of reactions. Most people in the UK were very in favour of them. The vast majority of members were actually okay with it, didn't have concerns about it. Most church leaders were okay and could see the benefits of them. There were some people that were really worried about them and said, well, isn't it just a tick box exercise? And how does it actually help us protect? And we had to do some myth busting with people. And we had to point out, well, look, if you're an organisation that are doing background checks, you're sending a very clear message to abusers that we're an organisation that understands safeguarding and that know how safeguarding works, and we're taking it seriously. So they're more likely to think, oh, maybe that's not an organisation I want to go and groom, because maybe they're going to be a little bit on the ball. It also sends a message to victims that you care about their experience. You want to do everything you can to try and prevent those experiences being repeated. And the other thing is, one criticism that people made of DBS checks quite frequently was that it only tells you about people that have been convicted. But the reality is, in the UK, the background check also can, if it's deemed appropriate and right, not in every case, but if it's deemed necessary, can share information on allegations and a pattern of problematic behaviour that might indicate somebody is at risk of abusing. So it can provide information over and above a conviction and court. So
what I would say, I
DBS
think
checks in the
sometimes
UK, most of them are being done. They're being done.
Hey, Sarah.
Sometimes
Sarah,
Sarah's
your
internet.
your internet's a little messed up. If you can hear us, your internet's a little messed up. So I think Jane's trying to sort of.
Sometimes Sarah's internet goes completely backtrack crazy, but it will be fine and within about 2 minutes. So I'm just going to quickly run through. I think the church.
So
it's okay, Sarah. We will get you in a minute. What I think the church thought was going to happen with DBS checks, and I think we promised quite a lot. You've got a whole membership here that if you bring in a policy, you've got a whole membership who are going to do it 100% because that's just who they are. You're doing something, and tomorrow we're all in the program. I think the hope was that DBS checks would look the same. Unfortunately, when a large organization is trying to do something that involves technology, involves a couple of different organizations to work together to make it all work, I think they thought it would go a lot smoother. Certainly, I think they thought it would be a lot quicker than this. And I think they felt at some points really disheartened that it should be further ahead than it was, or that, that everything should be in place. And actually, they were doing a really good job. They are doing a really good job. So most people at this point are DBS checked. Sarah, I think we've got you back if you can hear. Yeah, we've got you back, girl. Yeah. So safeguarding just now. So you're safeguarding specialist. So we've got state safeguarding specialists. Yep. What else have we got just now in the UK?
What we've got the background checks that are happening well, they're happening clearly. Sometimes they're taking longer than they need to take, but that's problems with the system. That's going to happen. But the DBS checks are happening. People are not allowed to serve unless they've got those DBS checks in place now. So that is happening. We're also seeing safeguarding specialists that have been called in, I think, almost every state in the UK now. And those safeguard specialists are able to assist and support people with getting background checks done, with helping with information around abuse, services, resources. They should be able to be delivering training, but I don't know how effectively that is working. I think it's going well in some cases and not in others.
It goes well in cases where Sarah is the person who's delivering training, but apart from that, there's a hell of a lot of misinformation out there, and I think the safeguarding specialists are in a perpetual loop of waiting for training. Without training, there is no safeguarding. The other thing that's happening is that if this is being presented to ward councils, again, ward councils is where information goes to die. That information doesn't filter down to members. So does the average member in the UK feel like they know how to recognise the signs and indicators of abuse and know how to keep their own vulnerable people safe? Possibly not. The willingness is there. And so safeguarding is a journey. And the church in the UK has launched that journey, and it's going. What we want it to be doing is going well, and I think there needs to be a little bit more fearlessness about what happens next. And so the what happens next part.
Sarah, I want to ask you a question. Can you hear me?
I don't think so.
Or
yeah,
Jane?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Wow.
I can hear you.
So
Can
when
you
is
hear
that
me?
journey going to reach the United States? That's what I want to know.
One little quick note here.
Okay.
Sarah, it might help if you turn your camera off and we just go with audio for a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Can you shut your camera off? If you look at your box down below, you should be able to go to the settings and just turn the camera off, stop cam. At the very bottom of StreamYard, you can just click stop cam and your sound will be a bunch better. Not you are. Yeah, not you are.
Oh, okay.
I didn't
A
want
lot
to
of
remove
people
this.
ask me to take my face off the screen too.
I'll come back on if you don't mind.
Sarah,
Go ahead. I don't know
Sarah
where
will
Sarah
look
went.
back in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she'll
she'll
come.
refresh back in. She'll be back with us.
She's a pro.
So
So
what we
my
want
question to
talk
you,
about,
you said this is a wonderful
Okay,
journey
yeah.
you're having. When does your journey show up here in the US?
Well, we hopefully anytime now, really. What we have in the UK is a Sarah and other experts who we can work with. We've got a whole host of experts here, and we're involving national charities and trying to encourage relationships to be built. We don't know what the law, what the safeguarding landscape looks like in the US. Something as simple as background checks, we're talking a different language when it comes to them. You have to be able to sign up to background checks here. There's a culture of them. In America, that looks slightly different. So we're talking slightly different languages. What we need is people in the USA and the separate states in the USA and around the world. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to understand what the legislation is. You need to be speaking to your elected officials, and we are going to help you to do that.
Well, isn't that why we have the hotline though?
Well, if you want to have a chat with lawyers, by all means, but we want to empower you to be able to speak to people who can make a really robust difference. So welcome back, Sarah. We're just talking about the safeguarding booklet.
Yeah.
So what we have here is we have just launched in this past month. Sarah, have you got your copy? Because can I just say, this looks so sexy. This looks really, really good. We got a copy. We got this printed out. This is our safeguarding information booklet. Now, while you can give this to bishops and stake presidents, it's not really for them. You can. The language in it, they might not love, they might disagree a little bit with the things that we say about culture. But what we wanted to do was to give an overview of what the landscape of safeguarding looks like. You see, when someone reports abuse to the authorities, the police, the support organizations don't necessarily understand what is so unique about how it plays out in Mormonism. They don't understand the nuances of how things need to be treated or handled in a specific way. So we've got some information that helps organizations who are supporting Latter-day Saints to understand, what do you need to know? Now, we also, and this is the main reason why we produced this booklet, we want you to contact your elected representatives, and we're using this booklet to send to our elected representatives. Sarah, would you like to share a little bit about our elected representatives and how they are responding to the booklet?
Well, they're showing great interest in it, and they're keen to actually understand what are the church doing and what are the church's future plans around expanding safeguarding. So we are having those discussions, and being able to have that discussion around legislation that's currently going through Parliament, and to have MPs talking and thinking about, has the time come to say that there needs to be some government oversight of the regulations and policies of safeguarding in faith communities? And that's not just our church. That's every faith community. Has the time come when actually we need to say, you know what, you've been allowed to do your own thing for a very long time in faith communities, and it's the Wild West out there when it comes to safeguarding, and it's time for some regulation and oversight and a framework that people can monitor and ensure that churches and faith communities are as safe as schools and other settings for children and young people. So it's about starting that discussion and getting people on board with what the reasons and the needs for that are, as well as bringing to their attention what our recommendations are for making the church a safer place.
And we're going to talk about those recommendations in a second, but what we want to emphasize a couple of points before we move to that. First of all, there is currently a Scottish child abuse inquiry, which is taking place at the moment. The recommendations from that should be coming out in the fairly near future. And we recommend, if you're interested in Mormonism, to keep a little eye on that abuse inquiry. We will be sharing when information about that comes out. Now, our recommendations from this booklet have been noted by the current Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, and we have been meeting with our local elected representatives, so our members of Parliament and members of the Scottish Parliament. That information is going to the Deputy First Minister and the Minister for Safeguarding. In Sarah's case for England and Wales, it's going there too. There is a real political will to understand what some of the loopholes are here. Now, I'm also very conscious that as we come to these areas of concern, we are really clearly asking for oversight, for governmental oversight. But we want to be very specific about how, because I can hear America shouting, "Screw you, King George," and back off, and we can handle our own stuff and keep your nose out of our religion. And you are right. What we are asking for here in the UK is governmental oversight of safeguarding within religions. So at the moment, religious safeguarding is a purely voluntary basis, and the assumption is that you're going to want to do good safeguarding and you'll sign up to work with organisations who will support you to do that. But it is entirely up to you. And what we're left with is a bit of a car crash here. This is what the ICSA inquiry, what it's recommending, what it's learned, that actually this is not just about Mormonism, that in all major religions in the UK, there are serious major safeguarding failures. Now, the other thing that we do in the Safeguarding Information booklet, as well as encourage lawmakers to think about what laws do you need to be tightened, what laws need to look a little bit differently, make sure that you're speaking to victims, survivors. The other thing that we're doing is we're asking people to really understand what is happening in their own faith community and engaging with it in a really robust way. Sarah, do you want to take us through the areas of concern that we have there on the screen?
Yeah, we wanted to talk to the people, get people to understand that the cultural context of abuse within the church is an area that has to be addressed. You know, for example, we need to stop giving messages about not criticising leaders, because people cannot speak out about abuse without it sounding like criticising somebody who's been abusive. We also need to think very carefully about the message that leaders are called of God, and that there's this innate authority that has to be followed and obeyed. Because if you tell a primary child that your primary teacher was called of God, and then that primary teacher abuses that child, what a confusing position, that the bishop was inspired by God to call this person as a teacher. This person abuses you. How confusing is it for that child to then work out whether God approves of that abuse and has allowed it to happen because it's okay or not? So the culture brings barriers, and the culture of having a lay clergy that are not professionally trained limits their capacity and their ability to respond appropriately to abuse. So we think it's really unfair to put our bishops and stake presidents in the positions they're in without adequate, frequent updating of training for them. The barriers to reporting abuse. If you've got an organisation that doesn't talk about abuse, that doesn't actually show it believes abuse and that it understands abuse, and doesn't give people messages that this is okay to talk about, you will have ongoing barriers to people reporting. So we need to actually get people to understand what are the gaps, why can't people talk about abuse, and make sure that police and children's services in the UK understand more about the Mormon church, so that if they are interviewing anyone from the church, they will understand the impact of the religion and the importance of the religion to people and the value that the religion can offer, as well as the impact of culture, so that they've got that information and understanding. We have sort of done some training for people around that when we've been asked to do that. The background checks, we think, yeah, they're great. We're really pleased that they're happening, but that needs to be extended. That it's insufficient at the moment, but that comes into our recommendations that background checks need to be extended to vulnerable adults and missionaries, which we'll talk about in a moment. Church leaders' response to victims and offenders and a lack of knowledge about victims' needs with a focus on forgiveness. And there is evidence that has come to us from many victims we've spoken to around a lack of cooperation with legal authorities from the church. You know, we've for example, we've actually had police officers say, well, I went out to interview the bishop, and when I got there, he told me he'd spoken to a lawyer who said he wasn't to make a statement. So we've had victims share that. We've had police officers share that with us. So there's a real concern around that's going on in the church, and church needs to get on top of that. Missionary program. This is a huge area of concern. You've got thousands of missionaries going all over the world, some leaving the UK, some entering the UK, that are not going through any kind of background check. The only time the church are doing background checks on missionaries is if the country they are going to require them as a condition of a visa or permit to enter. Other than that, they're not doing background checks on missionaries. And missionaries, in many, many cases, missionaries have abused on their mission. They've abused before a mission. So definitely is an area that needs to be tightened up. So one that we're really concerned about is missionaries. And we're concerned about the lack of understanding of risk assessment in the church. There doesn't seem to be a robust understanding of what constitutes a risk assessment plan and an understanding of the risk a person poses and how that risk can be effectively managed in a voluntary faith community. So we actually want to see more experts being involved in planning how to manage risk with church leaders so that that's put together, and much more transparency over that. At the moment, nobody knows what the church's plan is to how they manage risk. There needs to be some transparency on what they're doing to manage risk. And that doesn't mean they need to tell everybody in the congregation who's an offender. It means they need to be clear about how they're managing the risk. And the other one that we've seen this from the Church of England, the Roman Catholic Church, and other faith communities, is there's a need for the church to stand up and be accountable for failures that have happened on their watch. And what we would like to see is some consideration and action, not just consideration, but some action given around offering an apology. Just say to victims that have been harmed in the church, we're sorry. We are sorry this happened to you. We are sorry we let you down, and we're sorry we failed, and we're going to do better. So those are the areas of concern. I mean, you can read them in a bit more detail in our booklet, but those are areas we still feel are problematic.
So yes, we have a series of recommendations now.
As I say, you end up making some recommendations based on those areas.
Yes, we do.
What would be the ones here you really want to draw attention to? It sounds like there's 6 recommendations total.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. Do you want to quickly lay those out so we sort of know? And then I would just ask, as you're naming them, I would ask the audience to go, are these reasonable? Is this a reasonable thing that should happen in this church? So what are the recommendations?
Well, how we do the recommendations is really significant. What we do is in each of these points, we build on something that is already being done, and we talk about how it can be improved. So Sarah, you want to go for it?
Yeah, I think there's the one that I think is more important than anything else is that the church actually start looking at implementing a safeguarding committee so that they have a permanent safeguarding committee that can look at any abuse that's happening in the church, that can understand the picture, that can really get a grip of how much abuse is happening, where is it happening, what are the triggers, what can we do to prevent it, that they're reviewing the cases of abuse that they hear about, that they're listening to victims' voices in developing policies and procedures, and that the committee is overseeing the work of safeguarding in the church. And that committee should involve people that are external to the church, not just... You know, you can have a fantastic Mormon CV, but if you know nothing about safeguarding, you're not going to bring a lot to the table. So they actually need to bring people in that know what they're talking about. And that committee could then help to ensure that all of these other recommendations were taken seriously and implemented. And the next one, I'd say, the next important one after that is training. And training should be at a much higher standard, and much more than an hour once a year should be given to training.
Yeah, so we've had promises about training. We need training to come through and that to happen urgently. The one that we are really highlighting is the need to extend safeguarding. At the moment, this is about protecting children, and that is so important. However, the vulnerable groups that are being missed are those with learning difficulties, those who are elderly. Your elderly parents are having annual conversations where they're talking about their finances in a room with someone with authority. Now, that's really concerning, and you want to make sure that those conversations are being handled appropriately. There are all sorts of vulnerable people at different stages of their lives. So someone can be vulnerable for a period of time and can move into vulnerability. So where there is domestic abuse, where there is where someone is transgender, where people, especially at the moment, where they're affected by any policies that that make them fearful about going to church if they're going to perhaps be reported to any authorities. Now, the other thing that's significant is that we're looking for this to happen globally. So we need to give thought to how this will in areas where people actually may have reasons why it's difficult to work with the government. So, you know, countries where actually to find out where you're currently living might be dangerous or problematic for that individual. What we are really seeking here is conversation, and I think what would be really good is if perhaps, and I've not given Bill a heads up about this, but, you know, for example, to be able to model what that might look like. So at the moment, the big hot button issue in the United Kingdom, what's being debated in the UK Parliament, is the issue of mandatory reporting. Now, a while back, Bill had on your Facebook page, you had made a comment about mandatory reporting, and it was fascinating. Now, that's really important, and maybe you'll share your thoughts on that, because what Bill said is actually reflecting a lot of those conversations that are happening in Parliament. This is being debated, and those same points are being debated. Bill, do you maybe want to share your thoughts on mandatory reporting?
Do I want to share my thoughts on mandatory reporting?
Yeah.
I don't think we've got another 2 hours to have that conversation. I would welcome that as a separate thing. Yeah. So I'll just briefly say, about a year ago or so, I went down the rabbit hole of mandatory reporting. Forget Mormonism. Mormonism has tons of things they should be doing better, and the way they handle reporting is a cluster F. But there is evidence out there that mandatory reporting in some instances makes outcomes worse and makes certain situations worse. And I'm still in the midst of working out exactly where I'm at on that issue. I would only note that it's not a perfectly clean-cut issue. There are people on both sides who are experts in the field, and I'll leave it at that. But that's
let me emphasize.
Let me just say, one drop. What I'm saying is letting the church off the hook, and I want to speak to something else here in a moment. But please say what you want to say, and then I want to share something that sort of ties a bow on this stuff you've just talked about.
Please do. Now, I am really excited because this isn't by any means a gotcha moment for Bill Reel. It's complicated and it's nuanced. Now, in Parliament, exactly those same conversations are happening. And Sarah, initially, when we were talking, you know, way back about mandatory reporting, the national charity, the NSPCC, the jury's out for them with mandatory reporting. So Sarah, we had discussed resourcing and issues and what the threshold is for reporting and those kind of things. Now, overwhelmingly, what we're seeing is people would prefer that mandatory reporting goes ahead. But Sarah, how you describe mandatory reporting is actually very similar to how you describe DBS checks. So would you mind sharing that?
I think when it comes to mandatory reporting, I think the has changed. To the table.
So we're going to lose our girl in a second.
Sarah, we're losing you again.
Yeah, we'll lose her in a second, and then she'll come back. The essence of it is that it's a really complicated, nuanced discussion, and what we are looking for is in these rooms with these 4 or 5 individuals. They're having the damn conversation that if you choose not to do mandatory reporting, that you know exactly why you're not doing mandatory reporting, that if you decide not to do DBS checks, that you know exactly why you're not doing DBS checks. Now, what we expect you to do is to have really clear reasons that are nothing to do with God told you not to. The overwhelming request here from the government appears to be that we're going to get mandatory reporting. But as Sarah is frequently telling us, similarly to the background checks that we have, is that this is one tool in a toolkit. And if you're relying on safeguarding working because of background checks or because of, because of mandatory reporting, then you are not getting safeguarding right. You need to understand safeguarding and why it's important and why you're choosing to do the things that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're asking people to do with this book. Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, because we need background checks, we need reporting, we need background checks, we need reporting, but we need them to be part of a toolbox that form safeguarding. Neither one on their own are going to be a silver bullet. They're really not. There's complexities with all of it.
Yes, there are. And I think the greatest complexity is to get a Mormon leader to entertain the notion as really a reality. That there are people in his ward that show up to attend church, that the children there have to be protected from. If they can get that into their head, everything else is going to make a lot more sense. If we imagine that there's one person in every ward, and there probably is at least, who's going to have some kind of interest in children and looking for opportunities to groom and exploit. And we treat our ward children as if that's the case, then I think we're going to make some headway.
As if they're the pearl of great price. Let me tie a bow on all of this, and I'm going to put something up on the screen. And I didn't make any of these notes. This is sort of what you guys just went into. This will be different, though. I think this will trigger the audience to understand this from a different direction. So before the show started, I asked ChatGPT to come up with all of the safety measures every church should have in order to safeguard children. So I'll add that to the screen. Now, as I go through the list really briefly, I don't want to spend more than 10 minutes here on this, and we've already gone long. It's 8:36. I want to note, I'm going to just say out loud, because you named some of them. I want to say out loud and I wrote this down as we were talking in the beginning of the conversation. I wrote down all the mechanisms in Mormonism that keep the church from being able to do these things. In other words, we're all going, do these things. And what people need to connect the dots on is that Mormon theology and doctrine and policies and approaches to things are what gets in the way. Imagine how much would have to change. Let me name these. The legal hotline, which is designed to protect the church. The spirit of discernment. Called of God, you guys mentioned that. And not only called of God, but the leaders who are called of God, there's no mistake by God in making that call. Leaders are inspired. Line of authority, stewardship, purity, shame culture. You guys mentioned that. Repentance, non-transparency, milk before meat, inability to admit wrong or mistakes. I mentioned that already. Look down on outsiders, persecution complex. When the prophet speaks, thinking is done. Apologists say that's not really what we. Bullshit. Because I can show it by the fact that President Packer and several leaders after him, President Packer said to the 70, he said, Remember which direction you face. When the prophet speaks, the thinking is done. When you tell people that it only works down and not up, that's another way of saying when the prophet speaks, the thinking is done.
What's Doctrine and Covenants section 1, verse 37 say? Whether by mine own voice or the voice of my servants, it is the same.
Yeah. So
It's the
apologists
same,
can come
yeah.
up with a reason for why that's someone else's teaching and it got misused. Bullshit. Questions are honored, but opposition is not. Let's see what I'm trying to. A person abused has some responsibility. And that goes hand in hand with Mormonism's inability to admit specific past mistakes and to disavow them publicly so that every member in the church can move on from the past teaching that they no longer teach, but which they haven't disavowed. So it's still in the memory of all of the members who are aware of that teaching from the past. You cannot criticize leaders, right? Even if the criticism is true. The which way do you face? I mentioned, don't apologize. Don't admit specific mistakes. I've said that 3 times because it's a big one. And then you go through this and you go, what stops the church from having zero tolerance? What stops the church from wanting to have background checks everywhere? What stops the church from wanting a 2-adult rule or clear boundaries or mandatory abuse protection training or trauma-informed training or independent reporting systems or third-party oversight committees or hotlines and resources that actually handle abuse the appropriate way, external investigations, remove offenders immediately instead of sending them on missions or hiding them away and asking people in the ward to keep quiet, have a whistleblower protection policy, encourage people to speak out. That's the opposite of Mormonism. Install security cameras would be an option. You have plenty of money to do it. Maintain open door policy, confidential counseling services for victims, direct pathway for victims to seek justice. The things I named on the front end here, all this stuff in front of me written down, imagine how much Mormonism would have to change in order to actually be healthy. And then boom, now you know why they don't want to change. Yes. They can't make the changes because they would cease to be Mormonism. Mormonism, by its very nature, is a safe space for abuse.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make there, Bill. In my opinion, there is no room in the church that should not have a window. And I'm not talking about the glazed crap that just goes outside that you can't see through. I'm talking about in the doors, okay, big windows so that everybody can see everything and everybody knows it.
Yeah. You know, they told us when we first started this campaign, everyone was telling us the church is never going to change. The church is never going to listen. And this is the way it is. Yeah. And we are doing this work because we believe it can and it will. And if this is what the voice of the people expects, this is what they will have to do. So I believe it's possible. I believe it is the work of a mighty change of heart, and that needs to come from its people. I have not given up on that vision. And because amazing things have happened. Yeah. So I'm not ready to give up on it yet, even though I am no longer a member. I am going to fight so hard for this church because I think there are people for whom this is their life, and so I'm here for that. This was a huge part of my life. I am distancing myself from it, but I am still here for safeguarding. And Sarah and I have both made the commitment. I mean, this girl retired, right? She's still here doing this work. If the church will start its safeguarding journey and start taking it seriously and doing it properly, we're not asking for perfection, but we're asking you to do it, then we will shut the hell up and be quiet and go home, and it will be amazing. And at that time, we will be the pain in your ass that is saying things that you don't want to hear. And that's
100%. Absolutely. If they want us to shut up and go away, then get safeguarding right, and then we retire. That'll be wonderful.
Get it right. You guys are gone.
Until then, we're going to be here.
Yeah.
Oh, someone needs to put Sarah out of her misery, right? This is driving you crazy.
We
this
will,
space,
but
right?
I just got to remark again that it's overwhelming to me to think that any organization has to be dragged kicking and screaming to the table where they're going to protect their own children.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also though worth keeping in mind that this woman, this retired little lassie from England, dragged them cricking and screaming into this space. She did that. So this audience, all of these people, I mean, I know the church is driving you all crazy. I get it. But do you know what? This is really important. So if we can do this part together. So what we're asking the Mormonism Live audience to do, we have this booklet. Although it's not really for bishops, if you want us to send it to a bishop, then we will send it to a bishop. In the UK. So yeah, but we also need some funds to be able to do it because the printing's kind of expensive.
And can I just
send out.
Yeah.
No, Sarah. What? I'm teasing you. Go.
I was just going to say, what we need to do is we need people to use the skills the church trained them in place in the Book of Mormon. The church trained you all to be missionaries. The church trained you to place Book of Mormons. We'll do that with this safeguarding booklet. Place it in the hands of people who need it. Write your belief and your testimony in the front of it if you want, as to why it's needed and why it's important. And if you want your bishop or stake president to have it, we will send it to them, because we want to get this into the hands of people who need it.
So it will have a reaction. It will cause a reaction, but it's secondary to me for the bishops and stake presidents to have it, because they know this stuff. They've got the resources and they need reminded. Yes. So they, by all means, we can send it to them. You can send it to them yourself. That would be even better. We want this to go into the hands of police services, your elected representatives, and any organizations that are working in this space. So this is designed to help them. Now, what we also have, how is this going to happen in the UK? We have this resource that we can tailor for you, but we need you to assist us to do that. So if you want us to send you the PDF, we're not going to sell the copyright to the printer's copy in the manner of Joseph Smith. We will give it to you for free. So you can take the PDF, adapt it. We have our logo on it. You have our authority. Get it where it needs to go. If you want to do a print run of this in the US, then go for it. We would love you to do that. The important people that this gets to are people who make the decisions. We have a compliments slip that we send along with it. If someone wants to send it to their bishop, we just let them know someone in your ward has asked us to send this to you in the hope that you will find it useful, and we send them links to other resources. So we send it in a supportive way. We're not looking to piss people off, but we have the expectation that people are going to act on this. So that's what the Mormon. Yes.
If you can just give me the 3 steps. Let's say I or anybody else in the audience wants to take you up on this. What steps do we need to take to get a hold of the PDF?
Okay, so you can either email us or anyone who has it. So, Bill, you've got a copy of the RFM. You guys have a copy of the PDF?
This is the book you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, so the PDF version.
I'm going to try to, here's what I'm going to do. Do you mind if I upload a copy to our podcast website so I can then?
We would love that.
Okay, give me 2 seconds.
We would love that.
It's going to take me just a moment.
If you are in need of a printer's version of it, which has got all the marks so that they can do their stuff with it, email us direct and we'll send that to you. Then what you need to do, get it where it needs to go. Just put it in someone's hands. Make an appointment to speak to your elected representative. So the power in the giving of the book is really good. A PDF, it's great, but we don't all open our PDFs. You've learned how important it is to play stuff. So those are the things we'd like you to do. And then third, if you can let us know how you get on, that's really important too.
So I've already uploaded it to the website. You'll see right there on the screen. That's the comment that shows that the book is there. And then if folks will go
Thank
into,
you.
if you want it a different way, if you'll go into the YouTube description for this episode, it'll be right below the episode synopsis before all the stuff about finding our Instagram and all that kind of thing. It's there as well. So folks, you should have no problem accessing this PDF booklet from 21st Century Saints.
Awesome. So if you want to donate to the printing of the book, also we have a donor box link and stuff. You can do your magic, people. There is going to be a second edition of the book coming out fairly soon. There are a few people we wanted to thank in it. We have thanked several people and several organizations that we work with, but we have omitted to add in the incredible superstar that is Colby Reddish. And Cami. So just we wanted to let you know that we appreciate and see the work that you've been doing. We also shout out to Floodlit, the rest of the Brit Vengers, who are our unpaid interns in supporting us with this work. And and you guys, thank you so much for letting us speak about this crazy ass project that we're hoping will make a difference. There is something else that is really important that I want to make sure that we cover, and it's possibly the most important message of tonight.
Yes.
It is.
The work that
People are
we
asking, by the way,
do.
where should I forward it to? They're asking again, please, where should I forward it to?
Forward the booklet to.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to forward the booklet to anyone, if you want to send it to bishops, state presidents, if you want to send it to your elected representatives, I am so sorry that my Scottish accent is so thick, I need to remember to speak slower. So your elected representatives are the main one, but also police services, victim support services, schools. Anyone who could possibly have a vested interest in working with people who may have victim experience. And that is not just children. That also means organizations that are working with disabilities, with elder abuse. So all of those types of things. Domestic violence is also hugely significant. And so if you can get it in the hands of those people.
People working with adult survivors of abuse particularly need to know.
Yeah, your social workers.
Yeah. Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me, right? Such is the kingdom of God. And it's time, LDS Church, it's time. Put your money, which is exorbitant, put your money where your mouth is, and set safeguarding policies across the entire church. Africa, United States, wherever. There's no excuse for the only true and living church upon the earth with which the Lord is well pleased, that has $265 billion from doing the right thing in every possible way to protect every child under its banner.
Yeah. The reality is that everyone does not feel safe at church. A huge number of people feel completely the opposite. And so we need to remember that this booklet is relevant to supporting people who are in the LGBTQ community, who are immigrants, who are elderly, who are experiencing domestic violence. So this is about the whole community of Mormonism, because if one person isn't safe, then none of us are safe. What we want to do, and it's super important that we do this, is this work centers for us in victims and survivors' experiences, because everybody doesn't automatically survive this. This work is something that we're doing, hopefully to amplify your voices while you're trying to find it, or if you choose not to speak out. We want to make extremely clear that what happened to you was not your fault. We want to make extremely clear that there are people who are waiting. We are here to believe you, and we are here to support you and to point you in the direction of organizations that will be able to help. One of the concerns that we have is that because so many victims for different reasons have to remain anonymous, speaking out in this community is a hard thing to do. Everyone's taking a side. And that means that without the church investigating and without there being any media publicity around it, it means that there aren't opportunities for people to be able to say, that happened to me too. I am also a victim of this perpetrator. So we need to use opportunities like this to be able to say, if you need to come forward, then we can put you in touch with legal services that will support you. We can put you in touch with therapeutic services that will support you. And even if you're not ready to have that conversation yet, one of the things that you can do is to, in the UK, we have, they're called SARCs. They're centres where you can go and make your report, and at some time in the future, then it's something that you can follow up. So if it's just something that you want to think about talking about, there are all sorts of ways in which you can do that. It may be that you haven't directly experienced something, but you've witnessed or you've been aware of something. It is so important that you come forward too. We have cases, we have solicitors who are seeking witnesses in cases and keeping a record so that they can ideally all be joined up at some point, that someone comes forward as a witness for a report that's happened several years ago. In this church, we have seen time and time again, everyone knows. So for those of you who have been affected by any of the subjects that we've talked about tonight, we just want to re-emphasize there are support helplines out there. Please take the time to have a look. Maybe in the comments, you amazing bunch of people can share some resources and links and phone numbers. That would be a very kind thing to do. And just know that you're not alone. We're here and we're fighting for you. And if there's something that you need us to amplify, we will absolutely do that for you. I
want to say Jane and Chris, or Jane and Sarah, just very much appreciate the two of you. Folks, another way you can help, share this episode, get this in front of as many people as possible so that they can hear this conversation, so that a believer can sit with like, oh yeah, like that piece of Mormonism would contribute to an unsafe space. And that piece of Mormonism would contribute to an unsafe space. And only by me raising my voice and asking my bishop or my stake president, or asking in any way you can, the leaders higher up, whether it's an area authority or higher, to make changes. The only way they're going to make changes is if they are pushed to make changes. That is the history of Mormonism. So I just want to note that. We do have one phone call. Do you guys mind taking one phone call? And I left the banner up for quite a while. I've got one call in the queue. We'll take that and try to get out of here around 9 o'clock. Gone quite late tonight.
As long as it's not Peter Bleakley, because I'm kind of sick of hearing him at this point.
Okay, let's hope it's not
midnight if it's Peter.
Is this Peter Bleakley? Hello.
This is Kendall Christensen.
Good. This is not Peter Bleakley. Go ahead, Kendall Christensen. What do you want to say about the LDS Church's inability to get on board with protecting children?
Well, my question is a psychological one. I'm really interested in what parents and concerned people in the community can do as far as, like, what is the mindset of a child that is most vulnerable, and what are the specific techniques and lessons and concepts to transition them into someone who is empowered and more able to resist and prevent these things if the worst happens and a child is kind of on their own?
You are phenomenal. That is an amazing question. It's a big question. And I know that it could take, we could do a series of trainings around it all. But for the little time that you have, Sarah is an expert in this area.
I only heard part of the question. My internet signal is playing up massively. But I heard you ask about what are the concerns around the psychological. Were you asking about the psychological impact for children? What are we doing about that?
Sarah, I think if I'm not mistaken, go ahead. You can re-ask your question. No, go ahead. You re-ask your question.
Yeah, not necessarily the impacts, but just like, I'm imagining the worst case scenario. A kid is kind of on their own, and there's things that adults can do to prepare them to kind of transition to be of a mindset where they're empowered, they can, be aware and resist. But like, in the small experience I've seen, like a little bit of teaching can also be misunderstood, where they're like, a little too aggressive, like, oh, that's abuse or whatever. So what's like a good balance and a good what are the specific words and concepts to instill in a child?
I think we need to give all our children a basic education and understanding of what is abuse, because for a lot of children, they don't talk about something or report something because they don't recognise it as abuse. So we need to make sure that all our children have a basic understanding of their own body parts to start with, that they know what a vagina and a penis and a bottom and a breast is. They need to know that. Because if they don't know that, they can't talk about it. And it's surprising how many children are not given accurate information about their own bodies. We also need to make sure that children understand what is okay and not okay touch. So the absolute simplest way of making any child understand is if a swimming costume covers that part of your body, then it's private. And nobody has the right to touch there, ask to see, to photograph, or ask you to touch them there. Really simple. Every child can understand. Swimming costume, private. And that's really basic, simple education for young little children. We teach them at church about modest clothing. Extend that teaching and talk about looking after your body and keeping your body safe by telling people if anybody touches or tries to touch you there. We need to be talking to our older youth about healthy relationships. What is respect? What is consent? What does abuse look like? So to me, it's about preparing and protecting our children and youth with education and information so they can recognise when something is wrong and something is harmful. And if they've got that information and they've got a language to discuss and talk about it, then they're better placed to be able to raise concern.
A good starting point. Like my growing up experience in Mormonism was like, I never said or was allowed to say the word butt, and like penis or other body parts, absolutely never. There's so much shame and pressure around that. That is a huge insight to like make those things, be aware of their body and what's okay and what's not okay. I was never given that education. We were not allowed to talk about those things.
Can I just add to this?
And I think,
again, I don't mean to interrupt you. I want to add to this.
Yeah.
You mentioned consent. Consent's a big one. No religion, and he hung up. So I'm gonna just end the studio there and confirm the
Thanks
show.
for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
it's a good question.
Let me just say, it is a great question. Consent, you mentioned. Mormonism has never taught consent.
I know.
If you're a parent, teach your kid consent. Teach them that they have a right not to be tickled if they don't want to be tickled. They don't have a right not to be kissed by Uncle Jim if they don't want to be kissed by Uncle Jim. Teach your kid it's okay to question. Teach your kid it's okay to criticize when they see things that are unhealthy and wrong. Teach your kid that leaders do make serious mistakes, even if they pretend they don't. Teach your kid that they have a voice and they never need to be silent. Teach your kid it's okay to have boundaries, and teach them what healthy boundaries are. And notice, by the way, for every parent who's a believer in the church, notice in doing that list, you notice that those were healthy things and they are opposite of what your church teaches and preaches. And notice the discrepancy and ask yourself why that is.
And we need to be really mindful that some children and groups will be particularly vulnerable. That our gay youth at church, our gay trans youths are particularly vulnerable. And our disabled youth at church are particularly vulnerable. So we need to be really clear that we're giving them messages that actually it's okay. And we need to give an overriding message to victims. I heard what Jane said was wonderful about it not being a victim's fault. But we need to extend that message into nothing a victim was doing at the time of their abuse made it their fault either. If they weren't keeping the commandments, they were breaking every rule in the LDS rule book. It still does not make abuse their fault. And we need to be really hot on that message.
Sarah, the other aspect of what that amazing question was asking about was about words and language that you're asking children. Now, obviously, it was focused on children, but we can extend that. Sarah does phenomenal training, and I get to have the privilege of sitting in and getting sort of some one-to-one preview stuff ahead of she prepares. So I'm conscious that Sarah was literally sharing about this last night, about what is appropriate to ask, what's helpful to ask, and what can cause problems. And if it's okay, Sarah, before you sort of share this phenomenal phenomenal, thing. I was, it would have been maybe last year, I was having a conversation with Sarah, where Sarah had, we'd been chatting away for a few minutes and Sarah had said, Jane, I noticed there's some bruises on your arms. They look a bit like finger marks. Is everything okay? Now, they were finger marks. I have a disabled son, and he had sort of lashed out. And I remember saying to Sarah, it is so incredible that you asked that question, because if it had have been something more sinister, something that required action, she didn't shy away from it. She wasn't afraid of the question. So, Sarah, would you maybe share a little bit about what you train people in, about what's appropriate to ask and asking that question?
I think in an absolute nutshell, bearing in mind time is really going on, isn't it, guys? I want to keep you all here forever. In an absolute nutshell, we need to ask children if anything has ever happened to them that has been hurtful or that they don't like or been confusing or scary. Has anyone ever touched you in a way that has hurt you? Has anyone ever touched the private parts of your body? And has anybody ever upset you, hurt you in that way? Ask the question, because for many, many children, they're silent because they don't know how to tell somebody what's happened. And if an adult asks them the question and says, has anything happened to you? Then sometimes that will enable children to speak up and to talk. And we worked with somebody a while ago who had been abused as a teenage boy by youth leaders in the church. And this youth leader had abused other youth as well. It had been reported to the police. And he decided not to tell anyone as a teenage boy. And it was only when he was in his 30s, when he was asked a question, have you ever been sexually abused, that he actually was able to say, yes, I have, and then talk about his own abuse and then report it to the police. People need to be given permission to share something that is very difficult to talk about. And asking the question is not going to induce a rush of false memories and false accusations. It's just going to say to people, I'm willing to listen. And if something has happened, you can tell me and I'll listen.
Ain't she phenomenal?
Yeah. I just want to say thank you. I just want to say thank you to you ladies for coming on, for putting this together, for having the courage to, and the I don't know, the
balls.
Balls. Say it, balls. Yes.
The testicular fortitude to take on this thing and to not set it down. You guys are carrying this thing, and you're carrying it quite a distance. So I just want to say thank you to the listeners and viewers watching. This might be the most important episode of Mormonism Live you're going to hear all year. Protect the kids. Do anything you can to help these two ladies get this message as far as possible. If ward members in general started to raise their voice and go, I'm tired of being part of a church that doesn't protect people. I'm tired of being part of a church that I see things in the news every week. I'm tired of being part of a church that doesn't do its best. Then suddenly revelation will flow, ladies and gentlemen. Suddenly prophets, seers, and revelators will receive direction, and they'll make changes. And it's that way it does it. That's the way it does it. I want to sort of...
Bill,
yes.
Can I just say very quickly, if parents decide their children are not safe at a primary or youth activity and say they are not attending until I'm satisfied they will be safe, they will be made safe very quickly.
Yeah. Right. Yep. And if you stop paying your tithing until things get safe, if enough people did that, it'll change very quickly. Ladies, I just want to say thank you to both of you. RFM, I want to give them a chance to give any closing thoughts, but I want to get to you first. Anything you want to say here before we sort of wrap up, and then give them a second, and then we'll get out of here.
I will say the great secret is that we have all the power.
Yeah.
But we've trained not to use it. We've been trained as Mormons not to use it, to defer, to acquiesce, to conform, to obey. But we actually have all the power if we have the courage to use it. As you do, Jane, as you do, Sarah, and I want to say that you are my two new heroes, both of you.
Amen. So Sarah and Jane, any last words from you? Otherwise, we'll close it out.
You can find us on our social media pages. you want to get in touch, and
Yeah.
and that's all from me. So if you need us, we're here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Sarah?
we will stay here. We will be here for victims. We will be here until the church has got its house in order with safeguarding.
Yeah, until the
Whether
church
they
has
want
its
us
house
or
in
not.
order. Yeah, this isn't going
Yeah.
away,
We're a
Mormonism.
little,
The the better.
do you know, we're a bit like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Nanny McPhee film in America. Are you familiar with that film?
Yeah, a little.
No. Okay. Nanny McPhee said very clearly, I'm here when you need me and don't want me. And when you want me and don't need me, I'll be gone. And we're going to be like that for the LDS Church. We'll be there until they actually until they get to the point where they don't need us anymore.
Yeah. Well, good. And they do need you. And they need to make changes, and they need to make them sooner than later, because every day more people get hurt.
Yeah, they do.
Folks, please like and subscribe. Please share the episode. That's how we get the word out. Please support these two ladies, support 21st Century Saints. The PDF for the booklet is in the synopsis for the YouTube. It's also in the live comments. If you're watching this after the fact, turn the live comments on to the right of the screen. You'll find it there about 2/3 of the way through the show. I just want to note, we've got Mormonism After Dark on Saturday night at 8 p.m. instead of Friday. And otherwise, we'll see you for the newscast again for 6 on Monday. And Mormonism Live will return next Wednesday, 6:20 p.m. And until then, everybody, good night, and take care of each other. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night, everyone.